Right, well, good afternoon. It's 2:30. We'll make a start. Welcome to today's Planning Committee meeting of Rushcliffe Borough Council. For the benefit of visitors in the audience and anyone who may be watching on YouTube, I'll introduce who's here. I'm Councillor Richard Butler. I'm the chairman of the committee, and also in the meeting today are my colleagues, Councillor Mrs. Stockwood, who is the vice chairman, and Councillors Bailey, Clark, Mason, Phillips, Purdue-Horan, Price, Thomas, and Jay Walker. So welcome, and staff and officers. I have Phil Cook, who is the Principal Planning Officer, Kate Thompson, who is Area Planning Officer, Emily Dodd, who is Principal Planning Officer, Paul Taylor, Planning Officer, and also Mrs. Sells, the solicitor. So welcome everyone, and Tracy Coop on from Member Services. So welcome, and we'll go into the first item, which is apologies for absence and substitute members, please.
Hello, yeah, we have apologies from Councillor Healy and Councillor Bansal, and we have Councillor Phillips substituting for Councillor Healy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So welcome, Councillor Phillips. And do we have any declarations of interest under either or under the Code of Conduct or under the Planning Code? I suspect not. No. Okay, thank you. Oh yes, of course, I've got an interest. Yes, yeah, a minor detail. Yes, yes. Well, it's not an interest as such, but it's more of a procedural matter. Because I am one of the ward members for Cockgrave, and there are Cockgrave applications on the committee today, I will stand down from the committee for those items and hand over to my vice chairman. So thank you for the reminder on that. But it's not an interest as such, but it's a it's a procedural matter. Right, well, that's a good start, wasn't it? So there we are, on we go. So there's no other declarations of interest. Minutes of the previous meeting held on the 12th of May. For those here, are we happy they're correct? Shall I sign them as correct? Happy, thank you. So those are signed. Right, now, just before we go into planning applications, can I just confirm, have we all received and seen copies of the late representations? So we've all got those. I'm sure they will be explained as the meeting goes on, but I just wanted to be sure that everybody has got them. So that's good, thank you. So we'll go into the first of this afternoon's applications, which is land east of Bottom Green Farm, Bottom Green, Upper Broughton. And this is for widening of an existing agricultural access, erection of new gates and post and rail fencing, and formation of hard standing for agricultural purposes. And Ms. Thompson, are you talking us through this, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Members are advised that there's no late representations in relation to this item. So the application seeks planning permission to regularise alterations and improvements to an existing agricultural access. This includes the widening of the existing access, the erection of new gates and post and rail fencing, and the formation of hard standing for agricultural purposes. The alterations are improved to improve access for farm vehicles and enable vehicles to exit the highway without having to stop on the road. The application is partly retrospective, as some of the works have been undertaken already without the benefit of planning permission. We have the next slide. Thank you. The application site comprises an existing agricultural access on the south side of Bottom Green Lane to the east of Bottom Green Farm in Upper Broughton. The site falls within open countryside outside of the green belt. The site is located in the Upper Broughton Conservation Area with two key unlisted buildings found either side of the site and several others nearby. Conservation Area Townscape Appraisal identifies the site as a positive open space. A panoramic view across the site is identified as an important character feature of the conservation area. The first photograph shows the view of the site facing south. This is the existing situation, showing the works that have already taken place to date without the benefit of planning permission. Next, we are facing east along Bottom Green towards the cottage and the public right-of-way which runs along the eastern edge of the site. Next, facing west along Bottom Green, members will note the remaining conifer hedge to the site frontage, part of which was removed as part of the works undertaken prior to planning permission being sought. Next, we have a wider view of the site facing west along Bottom Green, and then finally a wider view of the site facing east. Moving on to the site plan. This shows the application site prior to any access works being carried out. Members will note the long stretch of hedge at the frontage and the farm gate on the northern boundary of the site, which have been removed. Next, we go to the proposed plan as originally submitted. This showed a 12-metre open access surfaced in tarmac chippings, as is currently the case at the site. Moving on to the revised scheme. As shown on the plan, the access would measure 8 metres in width and would arc from the highway boundary towards the western boundary of the site. The track would comprise a bitumen surface with 6mm bound granite chippings with camber to soak away. A metal farm gate is proposed to be located circa 17.5 metres southwest of the access. The existing boundary hedging to the front of the site is proposed to be retained. The soft verge and part of the conifer hedging to the front of the site, removed as part of the access works undertaken prior to planning permission being sought, is proposed to be reinstated and a rowan tree planted behind. Further south in the site, level with the new gate and pedestrian style, a new section of mixed hawthorn and blackthorn hedging and a further rowan tree is also proposed to be planted. A new post and rail fence measuring 1.2 metres high is proposed circa 16 metres to the south of the access, including a pedestrian stile comprised of 2 steps plus a support post. The existing rock curb, which also serves the cottage, from a total length of 13 metres to 18 metres to facilitate the proposal. Moving on to the elevations plans, the top diagram show the situation as it was prior to works being undertaken. The diagrams at the bottom show the proposed elevations as originally submitted, showing the 12-metre open access. The revised scheme is as proposed, except the width of the access is narrowed from 12 metres to 8 metres with an additional 4 metres of frontage hedgerow. Moving on to the appraisal now, the full suite of key considerations are set out in the relevant sections of the report to committee. I'll now focus on the most pertinent of these considerations, which are considered to comprise the principle of development and visual impacts, including the impact of the proposal on the character and appearance of the conservation area and important views. Policy 22 of the Local Plan Part 2 seeks to ensure that land beyond the greenbelt and the physical edge of settlements is conserved and enhanced. The policy states that development for the purpose of agriculture will be permitted, provided that it complies with the requirements of Part 3 of the policy, which includes, but is not limited to, the conservation and enhancement of landscape character, including its historic character. In respect of the originally submitted scheme, concerns were raised by the Council's Conservation Officer and the Highways Authority, with the Conservation Officer raising concerns in respect of the suburbanising impact of the development and the Highways Authority raising concerns that the width of the access will be excessive for its use. The revised scheme includes a reduction in the width of the proposed access, the reinstatement of hedgerow and new hedgerow and tree planting, a reduction in the extent of the hard surfacing and the replacement of the existing tarmac surface with 6mm bound granite chippings. On receipt of the revised plans, both the Conservation Officer and Highways Authority removed their objections. The application development is contrary to the neighbourhood plan. Upper Broughton Parish Council also objects to the proposal. The full details of their objection are set out in the report to committee. In the officer's view, the development proposal, including the reinstatement of the previously removed hedgerow, alongside the planting of new hedgerow and trees, will soften the appearance of the widened access and reduce its visual impact such that it will be compliant with both local and national policy. The site's agricultural use would remain, and while the scheme proposes a greater extent of surfacing and a wider access than that which originally existed, it's not considered that these works would be to the detriment of the character of the area. While the site lies between 2 key unlisted buildings, it's not considered that these works would cause harm to the setting. Therefore, the positive impact these buildings provide to the special character of the conservation area would be protected. The site would still provide a positive open space and wider outlook. It's not considered that development would significantly alter the view or that the development would reduce the significance of the view. The 1.2 2-metre tall metal farm gates would also retain the agricultural character of the site and would not detract from the view insofar as it provides an important understanding of the relationship between the village and the open countryside. Overall, the special character and appearance of the conservation area is considered to be preserved, as is described as a desirable objective within Section 72 of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990. Should members be minded to support the application, conditions are proposed requiring the access to be surfaced as per the submitted details within a period of 6 months, and the proposed landscaping, including the hedgerow and tree planting, to be carried out and completed no later than the first planting season following approval, i.e. between October 2022 and March 2023. The application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, we won't have any guest speakers on this item, so we can go straight into discussion, debate and decision. We've had the details in front of us on the presentation. Does anyone wish to make any points or ask any questions? Or do we need to go on to Councillor Thomas, please?
I did notice in some of the representations issues about the land being used for parking. So I would suggest that we move the recommendation with an added condition that the hard standing area and the entrance area is used for agricultural purposes only, unless there's a further planning application. Thank you.
Right. So to be clear, you're happy to approve, but with an extra condition to limit agricultural purposes only. Just heard that.
Limit the use of the land to
Use of the
agricultural
land,
purposes.
right. Okay, we've got that. Do you have a seconder for that at this stage? Councillor Bailey. Okay, so that's moved by Councillor Thomas, second Councillor Bailey, but Councillor Clark, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And I did have sort of fairly, when I say major concerns, I mean, because when you look at the street view as I am now of the original as it was before it was taken apart, it's quite a rural view because there's a grassed area in the front and there's still the original hedge. I accept that the revised proposal, assuming that the hedge can become a mature hedge again, which is always very unfortunate when a mature hedge is taken out, then that will soften the impact. Nevertheless, I still remain concerned that it does still look to me quite industrialized rather than a rural setting, because it's actually quoted in the reports. The name, the officers do acknowledge to some extent the rural view of that particular opening. I wondered whether I'd confess that, because I drive past there moderately often, and I confess I forgot to check in the original as it was before it was taken apart. There is a children's signpost in the hedge next to the original gate, which is no longer there because it's in the middle of their new opening. So can the officers confirm that, and I forgot to look whether it's there relocated or not. Is it relocated to another suitable position as opposed to being lost? And secondly, I remain a bit concerned about the chippings. It says bound chippings. I just want to be sure to replace the tarmac with bound chippings. Are they bound as in sealed? What I'm getting at is if there's a big farm vehicle with very muddy wheels comes over those chippings, is it going to pick up all the chippings and deposit them all along the road? So I need absolute assurance that those chippings are sealed and not loose, because they'll just become a major traffic hazard. And that does bring up I suppose it's not a construction site, I accept that, But I just hope that farm vehicles aren't going to deposit mud all over the road as well. And thank you. I think, isn't that facing the, that sign is facing in a different direction?
Oh, it is, yes, you're right. It's facing at right angles, wasn't it? One on there.
Originally, the sign is for traffic coming from the left of the photo towards the camera. Now that sign's facing the other way. However, that's probably a fairly minor highways detail. I'm most concerned about, I still remain concerned about the impact of the wider opening, but more specifically and particularly about the chippings.
Okay, so can we help on that with regards to chippings? The photograph doesn't help, does it? Because that's what it is at the moment. And have we got a better, perhaps a description of the chippings, and do we know if they will be bound? Because I get Councillor Clark's point completely that we don't like those chippings on drives for that very reason, because they get onto the public road. So are we fairly sure about that? And also just to keep in mind Councillor Thomas's added condition, if that's technically possible to do, etc. While we're pondering that.
In terms of the surfacing of the access point, the County Council Highways team are happy with that, what's being proposed. I mean, obviously we take their advice on that and they're happy with it, but we can make sure that it is bound. It does say it's bound. So we can only work really on what they've said, but there shouldn't be chippings being transferred onto the highway.
So Councillor Clark, I can see you're eager to come back on.
Well, yeah, I'm fully aware of what the comments with the highway. That wasn't the question as to what the comments in the highways. My question was specifically, have we assurance that the chippings are bound and sealed and not loose?
There is a condition that requires that to happen. It's condition 4.
Right, okay.
Yes, there is. The hard bounding surface. Yes. So condition 4, did you say? Yes. So it is there, but I'm sure that if permission is given, the site will be monitored, both officially and I suspect unofficially as well. And any breach is likely to be reported, I would assume.
I suspect there'll probably be about 50 monitoring inspectors locally every day, I would imagine.
I'm sure there would be. So does that help with regards to your concern, the urbanisation and the chippings?
It helps, Chairman. I'm still somewhat concerned about the industrialisation of that farm entrance, but I'll leave that there.
Okay, thank you. So with regards to Councillor Thomas's extra condition, are we sort of able to put that into conditions from a sort of legal and procedural point of view, please?
I'll see what the planning officers think, Chair, but from an enforcement point of view, it may be tricky to prove whether someone's agricultural or parking. Yeah, if you've got a vehicle that could be used for both agriculture, then that's one of the problems I can foresee.
Because I suppose it could be feasible that someone who is either lives there or is working there, but arrives in a normal car, for example, is not an agricultural vehicle, is it? But can you see the slight problem there, Councillor Thomas, with that?
It's been provided for access, hasn't it? So, you know, so that's what it should be used for, not anything else.
Yeah, but do we also have to think about perhaps, for example, if there are visitors coming along and parking there? I'm just thinking of I'm not being awkward here. I'm just trying to be realistic and practical about it. Councillor Bailey, sorry, I didn't see that.
Thank you, Chair. If you go back to the application, it actually says the formation of hard standing for agricultural purposes. So if it weren't being used for, I mean, you could say about perhaps a farm worker parking his own car there while he's at work, but that is because he is an agricultural worker. But it does, I think it needs to be enforced that it is for agricultural purposes, in so much as I don't know if we can tie it down. But if, for instance, someone was going to have I don't know, a festival of some type on the land further down, that would be very useful hard standing. So, but on the other hand, it is already saying it is for agricultural purposes. And if you were to have a festival of some type there, that would not be agricultural purposes, would it? I don't know. Would that? It would not be. So do we have to tie it down anymore? But I do think it needs to be emphasised that it's agricultural.
Right, okay, yeah, that's a good reminder, actually, that the application itself does refer to agricultural purposes. So if we were to give permission based on that application alone, that surely would be as part of the permission anyway, wouldn't it? Robert, would you agree with that? Or is there what, in the conditions? So, well, what are we? Let's see, we're drop curve there.
I think we can add that condition, Chair,
Could we add it here?
just making members aware in terms of the enforceability of that the enforcement team will have to consider those agricultural points, and if they can say that they are using it for agricultural purposes, we wouldn't be able to enforce. But for the scenario that you just gave, somebody using it for parking for an event, then yes, that would be enforceable.
Right.
So a
okay.
condition
So we could do that.
in that way.
And it's workable as well, because I'm often worried about putting conditions in that might sort of be unrealistic or impractical and so on, or unenforceable. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually went along to this application, had a look, and at the time there was a Coney lift van parked in that area. And I think if that van was parked on the road, you might actually create more of a problem in how do tractors then get in there, in and out. I mean, the size of tractors these days are huge. And if looking out to the road, there's no visibility to the left of a tractor coming out with that great big conifer there. So I don't know if there's anything they can do to actually reduce the height of that conifer, because when you look at the street view, it's a nice, neatly kept sort of hedgerow, where high up in the tractor you could see both directions, where now you can't.
So your main concern is the visibility and the height.
And I think there's a safety issue there with vehicles actually exiting with that conifer being that high, because the length of the front of a tractor, you've got to come out into the road before you can actually see to the left. Where with a wide sort of gateway, you can point the tractor at an angle so you can actually see around the conifer, but we don't want it that wide. So is there something we can put in there that the conifer is kept to a certain height?
I think we have got an answer to that. So yeah. So Mr. Cook, please. Mr. Cook.
Yeah, part of the proposal is to replant the hedge along the front of that, so that hedge is not going to be that high. So vehicles will naturally manoeuvre, so they're in a position and they will be able to see beyond that hedge. There's no intention to remove that at the minute, but like I say, highways do have powers to reduce it if it's causing obstruction. But in that particular case, like I say, the hedge is going to be extended with a native species hedge, so that wouldn't be that high. So vehicles approaching the exit would be in a different position.
Does that help? Is that okay?
It does, yes. Yeah. Just one more thing. The school sign, which is obviously in a different direction. Do we know where the school is? Is it sort of?
I think it's referring to the playground. There's a playground, isn't there, on the other side of the road, a little bit further along. So it's not a school. It's the village play area.
There's also a tennis court which is used by families. Tennis
Right.
court. So that would encourage youngsters to go along. So it's related to that as well.
Indeed. So it is warning of just the presence of children and grown-ups in the area, and we'll check the location of that. So I've got Councillor Stockwood and then Councillor Thomas again. So Councillor Stockwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to go back to the problem of possible parking there in the new area. Surely it would be in the interests of the owner of the farm to have those little signs that you put up saying permit holders only. That would, I suggest, be a help. because anybody else that thinks, oh, that looks like a handy place to park is going to say, oh, I haven't got a permit.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
I might be able to help with that. I mean,
Yes.
it's private land, Mr. Chairman. It'd be up to the landowner to decide what they wanted to do with their land. So,
Sorry, Councillor Stockwell.
Okay.
Councillor Thomas, please.
Thank you. With respect to Councillor Phillips's point about the visibility, I think once the drop curb is in position and the hedge, I think it'll delineate the entrance. At the moment, it looks as though any of that area where there's tarmac, the other side could be entrance, but I think that will resolve it to a certain extent. But I think my point about the condition is that the amount of hard standing that's been provided is excessive for the use needed. That's been identified by highways and by the officers, and it's that the concern is that the provision that excessive amount was for another purpose or could have been with another purpose in mind, which is why I'm requesting the condition, really.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification, and also that your comment about the drop curb. That photograph isn't particularly helpful, is it? Because that's how it is now, and we have to have in our mind how it will be once the work is done. Do you want to come back on any of those points, please?
Just to refer to the plan that's on the screen at the minute, clearly the size of that opening is going to be reduced. And I think by the fact that it's going to be reduced, there are going to be drainage channels either side of what's being proposed. So that would naturally reduce the amount of potential parking on there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bailey.
I'm a little concerned because when I think about it, the village hall is only a short distance away. It has no parking outside. And obviously village hall have events, and I just have a feeling that it could be used as a car park for village hall events. Now, obviously village halls are terribly important, but I have thinking about it, I have a nasty feeling that could well be as not even an overspill car park, because there isn't one, but a car park that will be used for such things. So I come back to very much what Councillor Thomas said, that I think somehow we've got to make sure it is in the planning application, it's agricultural purposes only, but I think there needs to be a notice or something put up, or some condition put in that it's not used as a general car park for village events.
Thank you. Bearing in mind it's private, could there be some sort of perhaps advisory given to the applicant to put such signs up on their land? Would that be a way to perhaps get over that problem? Or if you have any other suggestions?
As the site's privately owned, I think we'd struggle making them put a sign up to suggest or say that it can't be used for general parking. I think putting an advice note on there saying that it shouldn't be used for parking and that they are advised to put a sign up that it is for only for agricultural use. I think that would be an easier option.
I think as well, I mean, from my local knowledge, you refer to the village hall being quite near, but actually I think it is from my memory, it's a fair walk because the village hall is opposite the pub. And then you go around the corner into this road and it's...
But it's not that far. When you can't park on the main A606 and the pub yard is constantly used by the village hall. And I think there's a little bit of friction sometimes. So that it just makes me feel, knowing the village as I do, that actually it could well be used for.
Okay, well, we've got the suggestion of the advisory. Councillor Clark, did you want you were agitating or?
frightfully sorry, Chairman. No, I was trying not to respond. I was only just going to comment, but I decided not to. That the only major event, or one of the major events that the village hall has, took place a couple of weeks ago, and there were maybe 2 cars, perhaps, who might have been associated with the event that were parked on there, but it wasn't full by any means because I happened to walk past it. But anyway, I think it's up to the landowner to if they're concerned about parking on their land, it's up to them to sort it out, isn't it?
Indeed it is, and thank you. Right, any other comments or questions, or shall we make a decision on this? I don't see any more people desperate to speak on it, so we've had quite a good discussion. So we've got the recommendation on page 31 of 32, along with the extra and conditions, along with the extra condition that we've discussed and the advisory. Shall we make a decision? All those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous, but for the record, anyone against? No, and there won't be any abstentions. So permission is granted as per the report. Thank you very much. Right, well, musical chairs now. I will vacate the chair and hand over to Councillor Stockwood. For our next applications. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a very unusual situation in that the next 4 applications are interlinked, and but we do take them one at a time. I believe we've been sent a map, which I personally found very helpful. So the first one this afternoon is land rear of Mill Hill Lane, the old park, Cockgrave, Nottinghamshire. And it's an application for outline planning permission for the construction of up to 210 dwellings, and all matters are reserved except for access. Thank you. I'll ask Mr. Taylor to take us through the presentation, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm aware that members have received the plan highlighting the 2 strategic allocations and their proximity to one another. But before we move on to the next items on the agenda, I thought it might be just helpful to give you a brief overview of the interrelationship of the next 4 applications, because I appreciate when you read the documents in isolation, having lived and breathed this for over a year now, I know I get confused, and therefore I appreciate that members might benefit from just a little bit of guidance as to where the sites are. I appreciate everyone's not as familiar with the borough as others. So the next 4 applications relate to 2 allocated sites within the local plan part 2, and you can see them on the plan on the screen at the moment. They're the 2 purple shaded areas. Those familiar with the area will know where the colliery redevelopment is located, and obviously the proximity of Cockgrave itself is clear from the plan in front of you. Members will know that the plan was adopted in October 2019 and sets out, amongst other things, the areas of the borough for housing and employment growth over the current plan period, which runs until 2028. For the ease of identification, I will refer to the sites as land north of Hollygate Lane, or land north, and land south of Hollygate Lane, because that is the highway that separates the 2 allocations. You'll also note that I'm being fairly careful in my pronunciation of allocation, application, and applicant, because there are different numbers for everything you are considering this afternoon, and again it can be a cause of confusion. If we can have the next slide, please, Phil. This is the extract from within the local plan part 2, and it clearly shows that the 2 sites in blue. The proposal for land north is a single planning application, whereas the proposal for land south comprises 3 separate applications for a single housing allocation. Whilst this is not strictly compliant with the policy requirements that requested or require the submission of a single application, officers are bringing all 3 applications, or all 3 components, before members this afternoon for their consideration at the same time. So officers have all the information within the agenda packs that I'm sure they've thoroughly digested. And the proposal for land south have been assessed both individually and collectively against the plan requirements. The 4 applications collectively propose a series of highway improvements to facilitate access to the respective application sites, but also off-site highway improvements to help mitigate the impacts of traffic generated by the proposals. If we can have the next slide, please, Phil. So that is land north. That will be the first application we will be considering. And as we move through, you'll see this plan will appear for all 4 applications, but the site in question will always be identified in the gold yellow colour. So you can clearly see land north is a single application site, and it is north of Hollygate Lane. If we can have the next slide, please, Phil. The improvements proposed include within Cockgrave itself, those familiar with the area, the church is behind the photographer, the Man Arm to the right hand side of the screen, and the post office dead ahead. We can have the next slide, please, Phil. A mini roundabout is proposed in this location as part of the applications collectively. And if we can have the next slide, please, Phil. Again, moving along through Cockgrave itself towards Hollygate Lane. Again, those familiar with this area will be familiar with this bend. You are currently stood on Bingham Road. Dead ahead of you is Hollygate Lane, and as the road bends round to the right, it becomes Colston Gate. There are proposals to change the priorities at this junction so that Bingham Road runs into Hollygate Lane as the priority route, with a T junction formed at the junction with Colston Gate. And we can see that in the next slide of the proposed configuration to change the priorities at that junction. Moving on to the next one, please, Phil. Again, this is Hollygate Lane itself, looking generally in a, get my orientations correct, in a westerly direction. A new roundabout is proposed on Hollygate Lane to serve both the allocations to the north and to the south. And it's generally in the area of the large red arrow in the middle of the photograph there. Again, if we can have the next slide, again, that's just looking back at from where the photograph was taken previously, again, giving an indication. So the allocation to the north is on the left-hand side of this image, and the allocation to the right is generally on the right-hand side of this image. We can have the next slide, please, Phil. Again, this is the roundabout that's submitted as part of the application that members will be considering in a moment's time. And next slide, please, Phil. On Colston Gate itself, getting slightly ahead of myself, but there are improvements shown in relation to the allocation on the southern side of Hollygate Lane, again, to change the priorities on Colston Gate so that traffic is fed through the southern allocation down to the roundabout to change the priorities, again, for traffic travelling along Colston Gate. Again, that gives an indication of how that junction is proposed. And then finally, slightly further afield, there are proposals for alterations to the junction of Cockgrave Road and the A606 Melton Road that are currently being discussed with the applicants, or will be being discussed with the applicants. We're waiting for responses back from colleagues at the county highways, but they would be addressed as part of any section 106 agreement. We can have the next slide, please, Phil. Again, that is the junction in question. Again, if anyone's travelled in that direction in the last week or so, they'll be familiar that the road is actually closed at the moment, accounting for the limited traffic sat at that junction at the moment. So hopefully that helps members get their head around where the sites are, how they relate to each other, and what they will be being asked to consider this afternoon. So, again, that's just giving an indication of where the junction is. So first item for members' consideration this afternoon is what I've referred to as Land North, but its official title is Land to the rear of Mill Hill Lane and the Old Park Cockgrave. Members are advised that there are late representations for this particular application, and they relate to the officer recommendation. It's a proposed changing of the wording because of the interrelationship between all 4 applications this afternoon. As I've previously indicated, I at times have confused myself, and there have been some errors that will come out in the late reps where there's been an attempt to get consistency across the application, but I'm human and I have missed certain things. What is being proposed is a change to that recommendation whereby it would facilitate through the head of service minor changes to the wording condition that don't go to the heart of the condition, but potentially avoid the need to come back to committee to agree any wording on any such applications. There's also a suggested additional condition which is set out within the report. We've had comments from colleagues at County Archaeology fairly late in the process, voicing concerns about the potential impacts on an area of archaeology within the site and the potential impacts of permitted development in the future on that. Officers are of the view that if development is permitted, we cannot control it. It is permitted by definition, and therefore the suggested wording of the condition within the report is considered sufficient to address the concerns and to preserve the archaeology in situ. And finally, a minor alteration to the wording of condition 11, which was the landscape ecological mitigation plan. Within the wording in the agenda, it required that mitigation measure to be in perpetuity. I'm advised by colleagues that it should only be for the first 30 years from planting is the industry standard, and that is common on the other application. So again, it's one of those scenarios where I have missed something that I didn't intend to miss. So that's the late representations. As previously stated, the site is allocated within local plan part 2 for around 180 dwellings. The application before members this afternoon is for up to 210, with only the access to be considered at this time. Officers and technical consultees have assessed the proposal and the potential impacts of this quantum of development to ensure that they can be suitably mitigated. The agenda report addresses the increase in quantum between the policy around figure and the proposal before you at paragraph 63. And officers are satisfied that the proposal can be accommodated and mitigated accordingly. The site is bound by woodland comprising part of the country park to its north. To the east of the site are industrial and business uses. To the south is Hollygate Lane, residential development, and on the opposite side of Hollygate Lane, the land south allocation. And again, to the western side, there is existing residential development that forms part of the settlement of Cockgrave. The land is currently agricultural. It is fenced off, and it's been fenced off for a good period of time now. Access is proposed to the site from a new four-arm roundabout on Hollygate Lane that would also provide access to the allocation on the southern side of Hollygate Lane. Go to the next slide, please, Phil. So this is the red line plan, and you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of the image, there is 2 of the 4 arms outlined in red, giving you an indication as to where the proposed roundabout access is on Hollygate Lane. We can have the next slide. And again, you'll see the interrelationship between the yellow sites you are currently considering and the 3 different coloured areas on the southern side that we will be considering later this afternoon. I will now take members on a virtual site visit around the site, and due to the scale of the site, I've included maps in the bottom corners of the images to give you an indication as to where the photographs were taken from. If we start in the Manvers Business Park on the southeastern corner of the site, if we can move to the next slide, at the end of that road is the corner of the allocation site. Again, you can see the security fencing that's currently in place. The woodlands at the sort of middle of the image showing the country park woodland that forms the northern boundary of the site. Next slide, please, Phil. Stepping back out onto Hollygate Lane, we have Manvers Business Park to the right, with the new proposed roundabout will be in the middle of the image. Have the next image, please, Phil. This is just beyond the business park. This is the currently open frontage. I say open, it's got the Harris fencing in place, but it is primarily undeveloped, and the new access point is proposed in this particular part of the site. Next image, please, Phil. And again, moving slightly further along Hollygate Lane and looking back, this is the site frontage onto Hollygate Lane with the roundabout shown roughly in the area where the vehicle coming towards the photographer is. For the next image, please, Phil. Moving slightly further along Hollygate Lane, again, following the maps in the corner of the plans for those less familiar with the area, there are a row of cottages fronting onto Hollygate Lane. And then we move to the next image, which is looking in from Bingham Road towards the old park. Again, the old park is primarily bungalows. There is occasional 2-story properties within there, but again, if you go to the next image, please, Phil. Again, panning around to the left, there are a series of bungalows within this development, and then stepping back out onto Bingham Road, slightly back towards Cockgrave and into East Acres. Again, you'll see the arrow in the bottom corner indicating where we are. We step into this residential cul-de-sac, and again, you'll see the nature of development in here is primarily 2-story. Where the tree central to that image, the darker green tree, is there is a footpath way that runs up the western boundary of the site. As we move to the next image, we step through that gap and onto the footpath. So again, you'll see the security fencing with the site to your right-hand side. East Acres is now behind you, and you can see the woodland planting delineating the northern edge of the site within the centre of that image. Moving up the footpath and looking back towards where we've travelled from, for ease of reference, I've indicated where East Acres and the old park are. For those not quite sure, the site again is on the left-hand side of this image. There is a pedestrian walkway from this footway through to the neighbouring residential development on the western side. Next image, please, Phil, which brings you out onto Mill Lane. And again, a series of bungalows that back onto the northwestern edge of the site. And then moving to the next image, we move up to the top corner of the site. And again, you can see East Acres, the old park, and Mambers Business Park, where we started our journey. I think the final image is just from within the woodland itself. The site is to the right-hand side of this image. This pathway does connect through to the country park. It gives you an indication of the level of tree planting and growth within this particular part of the boundary of the site. Back to my notes. Next image, please. So members are reminded that the site is allocated within the local plan, and the application before you is an outline form only with access to be considered. Illustrative plans on the screen have been submitted to demonstrate that the site can accommodate the quantum of development proposed, and the pertinent technical matters have been considered by technical consultees and officers. None of those consultees are objecting to the proposal, and notably the Highway Authority are not objecting to the access arrangements. The application is before members this afternoon only because the application is on land owned by the Borough Council. Currently, Rushcliffe own part of the allocation site and also own part of the land required to put the roundabout in onto Hollygate Lane. No objections have been received from the ward councillors or the town council, and whilst representations have been received set out in the agenda papers, officers are content that the issues raised can be mitigated through the suite of conditions proposed. Therefore, officers are recommending that members approve the application as per the revised wording in the late reps, as per the conditions in the agenda, including the revisions set out in the late representations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have two speakers on this application, and the first, Robert Gallage. Would you like to step forward, please? I'll just remind you that you have 5 minutes to speak. You'll be indicated when there's 30 seconds to go. And you press the red light, the button for the red light to come on the right-hand side. Begin when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. Members, officers, observers and fellow speakers. Robert Galley, Planning Director, Barratt Dave Wilson Homes. Chair, there's been considerable dialogue and discussion regarding this outline application for its duration, and I'm delighted to confirm that agreement has been reached with your officers in terms of associated impact and the package of mitigation. Agreement's been reached with all statutory consultees and stakeholders, and as already alluded to, there are no outstanding objections from the above named parties. All discussions have been positive and proactive, very much aimed at achieving a planning solution and overcoming constraints and problems. A comprehensive view has been taken across Cockgrave towards cumulative impact of this proposal and the other three applications south of Hollygate Lane, Cockgrave, before members today. For the record, collaboration and cooperation between ourselves on this application and the remaining three applicants, proponents and developers south of Hollygate Lane has occurred continually throughout the planning application process, thereby establishing the overall impact of up to 445 dwellings in Cockgrave holistically, providing suitable mitigation comprehensively, reaching a satisfactory planning outcome collectively, and guaranteeing early delivery of appropriate infrastructure, necessary improvements and specified measures in terms of facilities, services, access, highways accordingly. For completeness, I also confirm community engagement has occurred throughout via dialogue and discussions with local residents, the town council regarding our development intentions, and we've reflected on feedback received, amended our approach, assessment and reacted accordingly. Chair, there are remaining objections as referenced in the committee report to this proposal before you. All have been addressed through impact evaluation and planned mitigation via planning obligations or Section 106 planning obligations. The officer appraisal in the report is acknowledged. Section 106 planning obligations have been tested and framed, and we're content with both, as alluded to in paragraphs 133 and 134 of the committee report, together with the accompanying work in progress table. The planning balance and conclusion is welcomed, the recommendation is endorsed, and the planning conditions agreed. In conclusion, Chair, I commend the outline application for up to 210 dwellings to members and urge the committee to endorse the officer recommendation accordingly, thereby enabling the delivery of 210 dwellings, 21 of which will be confirmed as affordable units, embracing some first homes. The applicant developer can help meet your approved strategic housing requirement in Cockgrave. And of course, we can help maintain a continuous supply of new housing land over the next 5 years in Cockgrave and across the borough as a whole. And last but not least in this segment, we can help achieve your corporate and strategic objectives economically, socially, environmentally, and regenerationally for Cockgrave as framed and planned in the Rushcliffe Development Plan, namely parts 1 and 2 of the local plan. Finally, Chair, this applicant developer has a proven track record of housing delivery involving major strategic sites in Cockgrave and elsewhere within Rushcliffe. I'm confident that this site too can be delivered successfully with outline planning permission, providing the platform for progression towards this ultimate outcome. Members' endorsement today will ensure certainty and confidence in moving housing delivery forward accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The second speaker is the ward councillor, Councillor Butler. I believe you know the procedure.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. I realise this is just an outline application at this stage, but will request serious note and consideration is given to the following. I queried the increase from the local plan policy of 180 to 210 homes, and I understand the explanations, and it's not an exact final number or science, and at the final number and types will come at the full planning application stage. I note too that there will be the usual mix of home sizes and types. Given the overall ageing of the population and also proximity to the Old Park and Mill Lane, which are long established small development of bungalows, and I know you've heard this before, but could I please request that come the full application, there are single story dwellings within the site, and the reasons being market need, but also to reflect and complement the Old Park and Mill Lane. Again, and I know it's only outline and the layout plan is indicative, but I feel strongly that we must ensure that the suggested green areas or buffering between the new houses and the existing houses, especially on East Acres and the Old Park and Mill Lane, is certainly no less than shown on the indicative plan. This is very important for the amenity and lives of existing households, as well as the needs of residents in the new properties. Could we ask or clarify if there will be a pedestrian access link leading to East Acres? There is a footpath there, as we saw, but I'm not absolutely sure whether the new development will link into that. The reasons for asking that are that several hundred people of all ages on the new development will, and we want them to, access shops, schools, health, leisure, and other services in Cockgrave Centre. Hopefully, people will get the mindset of walking more. However, and we're already seeing this now, it's getting increasingly challenging for people to cross Bingham Road due to the amount of traffic. The road is crying out for some type of pedestrian crossing or signalling arrangement, and it would make much sense to have such an arrangement on Bingham Road near the current East Acres junction, which would obviously benefit East Acres, but it will also benefit people of the new development as they walk or access to the centre of Cockgrave. Similarly, further along on Bingham Road and into Hollygate Lane, where there are increasing numbers of pedestrians from Hollygate Park, which is also on the north side of the road, and pedestrians need to be confident to cross to the south side to get into Cockgrave. I'd also just like to mention the proposed mini roundabout at Plumtree Road, Bingham Road junction, which is, I think is generally a good idea. And I realise this is a highways matter as opposed to a borough matter, but could we, I want it noted that we must, as much as possible, preserve the parking, the on-street parking that's at the post office, which will be near that roundabout, because that is absolutely critical and crucial. And I do appreciate that's more of a discussion for highways, but I do want members to be aware of that considerable request and concern. Back to the proposed housing numbers and the indicative layout, paragraph 96 refers to adequate car parking provision, and even if the numbers get as high as 210. I hope the developers and planners will note that, as we see so often, plans, whether indicative or actual, always show lovely new houses with cars parked on driveways. However, we all know that in reality, when the real houses are built, before very long, as well as cars on driveways, we have lots of cars parked on the road, or more accurately, on part of the road or part of the pavement. Not only does this spoil the view and the appearance of the lovely new houses, and I genuinely mean that, so to speak, they do cause problems for pedestrians trying to negotiate past, especially with wheelchairs, prams, etc. I make this plea that we are realistic regarding car parking spaces, and to seriously consider there is sufficient off-road parking areas in addition to the generally tight individual driveways to discourage and reduce the need for residents or visitors to have to park in such a way. And finally, slightly pedantic, but typing matters, but I think they're quite important. On page 72 of the S106.
30 seconds.
Page 72 of the S106 agreements, I think there's a typing error in the second column next to the bit that refers to secondary school provision. I'm not sure if it makes sense. So if you have a little read of that, and it didn't make sense to me. And so if you have a read of that, you can see if you can see what I mean. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like to answer some of those points, please?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Chairman. If it helps the ward member, the Highway Authority have recently adopted a new highway design guide, which refers to parking standards, amongst other things. I know they are enforcing it fairly rigorously on other large-scale developments I'm looking at. The developer is in the room, is what I will say. That they will have heard your pleas. None of us know yet what the reserve matters may look like. They're not before us for consideration, but I understand the sentiment. I understand the point. Similarly, with regards to the plea for single-storey dwellings, again, the Borough Council is duty-bound to determine what is submitted. We have to assess that against what our local plan policies say. Currently, we don't have a policy requiring a percentage or a number of single-storey dwellings. But again, the developer is in the room. They will have heard the plea of the community. There's not a lot much more I can add in respect of that. With regard to the section 106 table, apologies for any typo. It is a work in progress. It's primarily a document between myself and the legal department as a form of formal instruction. But again, it's there to highlight to members the package of materials that are being considered and reviewed. So I will look at that. I appreciate it is a public document. Finally, with regards to access to the public right of way, any deviation to the current right of way would require the appropriate paperwork from colleagues at county in regards to the public rights of way department. So any deviation away from that, any diversion, temporary or permanent. With regards to connections into it, it is something that members could propose as a condition. It's currently not on the package. It wouldn't seem unreasonable, but again, we don't know what the reserve matters layout. Again, the plea for separation distances, I know I'm telling you things you already know. We don't know what's before us in respect of that. The document submitted clearly shows that the housing layout could accommodate that quantum of development whilst providing ample open green space and protecting other areas, whether they be wildlife areas or archaeological areas. The final point with regards to the request for a crossing point on the Bingham Road, the developers can only mitigate the harm arising from their development. They can't necessarily address an existing problem that may exist within the community. Colleagues at the County Council for Highways haven't asked for a crossing. They haven't considered that to be a detriment as a result of the quantum of development being proposed as part of this application or indeed the cumulative impact of the applications we will be considering this afternoon.
Thank you. What about the point of pedestrian access?
Yeah, with regard to the pedestrian access, Chairman, yes, that can be conditioned if members wish to suggest that in their consideration of the application.
Thank you. Okay, well, we've had the speakers. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got several things really. The first thing, I just draw your attention to the primary school contribution in the draft section 106. And this is no comment at all on the applicant, but the county has asked for a section 106 agreement funding that can be used to provide primary school places outside Cockgrave. And as far as I'm concerned, that is not acceptable. If there's a need to provide primary school places outside Cockgrave, then this is not a sustainable development. And I would request that that part of the section 106 wording is removed so that the county council are absolutely aware that they have to provide school places for the children in these developments in Cockgrave. So that was the first point, really. I mean, this has happened in Eastleigh, basically, and there was the same thing on the Ranston Road site in Eastleigh, where there was a similar clause. And what happened was the county council did not provide the school places in time, and they have incurred millions of pounds providing a temporary school in that location because they gave themselves breathing space to not have to think about it. And I do not want to see the same thing happening in Cockgrave. So I would request that part of the section 106 on primary schools be struck on this application and on the ones to follow. Second point is about access. This is an application with all matters reserved except access, and that usually the way these usually go is that the access refers to vehicle access, and whenever we raise pedestrian access, as the ward member has done, and cycle access, it's always stated that these will be resolved at reserve matters stage. But when we get to reserve matters stage, it's always said that access was resolved and outlined. So I think particularly pedestrian access on this one, as the ward member has stated, but also cycle access is so important that there's cycle access from here through into the country park. And the connections at the moment are footpath accesses and not bridleways. So there's no cycle path access as far as I can see through into the country park. And there's also the matter of a bridge that hasn't been provided, which has been drawn attention to by residents. And I would want to see that sorted out in some way before I was happy with this. As far as the ward member has commented on parking and the quantum of development going up from 180 to 210, I think the thing to notice in Cockgrave is that affordable housing is only 10%. So the market housing will be 90% on this application. So 90% of these houses could have potentially be 4 and 5 bedroom detached houses, which incur a huge parking requirement. And tandem car parking spaces where they park one behind each other always spill out onto the road. And this has been identified in one of the resident comments. So I would ask that that is looked at as well. Yeah, I have got some other things, but I'll just be quiet now if that's all right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Officers can certainly review the section 106 concern regarding education not being within the local community. It will need to be a discussion between officers, legal services, the applicant and the education authority. But that we can certainly take that as an action point and note the concern of the member in question. With regards to the pedestrian cycle access, I take the point. Access is primarily how are cars getting in and out of the site. I appreciate there are knock-on implications between how is the site connected to its wider community. There are certain measures we can control at this point and certain things we can't, I think is probably the shortest way of summarising it. In terms of connections within the site to existing public rights of way, as previously stated, that is something that members could add as a condition if they wanted to, as part of their consideration of the application. In terms of improvements off-site, those matters will have been looked at by the Highway Authority as the technical body in this. They have not come back and requested parking or cycling connections into the village over and above the existing infrastructure that's there. With regards to the bridge, I believe there has been some relatively recent movement on that, and things are progressing. I would need to defer to colleagues, but I can certainly update Councillor Thomas in respect to that off the back of this meeting, because it's not something I've been directly involved in, but I understand that there has been progress with the case officer who's been dealing with that particular application. I appreciate it's been a long time coming. I won't speculate on the reasons for that, but I dare say the pandemic certainly hasn't helped in respect of that. And finally, with regards to tandem parking, again, I'm aware of the issue you raise. It's where you've got a garage and then two cars in front of it. The new highway standard, as I understand it, doesn't allow the developer to count the garage as a third parking space under their current standards, their new standards, which helps to a certain extent in terms of the overall parking provision that's required. But I would reiterate, it is a reserved matter. Highways have looked at the quantum of development proposed and are advising that there is sufficient parking capability within the red line boundary of the site. We would need to consider that at the reserved matter stage.
Has that answered your plans? Okay. Councillor Walker, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this increase of housing is problematic for me because there's this general creep of numbers all the time on this borough that is very, very problematic, and kind of makes the local plan a bit redundant, if you ask me. I also have major concerns about the access. You know, I read what your Councillor Thomas has made here, because there needs to be some sort of access to that park, showing us those lovely green pictures that you showed us with no provision for access to that space is crazy to me and really short-sighted and really unfortunate that that wasn't included today. I'm quite interested to hear about what the developer mentioned, the early development of infrastructure. I'm quite interested to hear more about what that is, what exactly that was meant by that, because I haven't seen any evidence of that. Again, reiterating the pedestrian access point that was mentioned by the ward councillor, I would like to see that as well. I have big concerns about only 4 social housing in Cockgrave. That seems a real oversight to me. It feels like there should be more there. Feels like we're not necessarily targeting need, but more just doing what the developer and what the developer wants, as opposed to what the need in that region is. So the lack of social housing on the development is poor. So yeah, there's big concerns for me. And then the pedals objected to it, the local cycling group. So I'd be concerned, like, there must be a reason for that, whether the highways did or not. A local cycling group is objected to this based on the fact that there's very little access for cycles. There's no provision for cycles. There's no cycle lanes kind of even mentioned. There's a beautiful country park to access from that point, and it's just no mention of it whatsoever in any of the plans. Is a shame. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Through you, in terms of the increase in housing numbers, again, I would reiterate the local plan says around. Ultimately, it is for members. It is not a cap. It does not say no more than 180 dwellings. As part of the application process, and it has been a lengthy process, I think all parties in the room would agree, there has been a lot of scrutiny about the numbers, the potential impacts on vehicle movements, relationships to housing, impacts on infrastructure, impacts on ecology, wildlife, you name it, we've considered it. The position we're at is officers are content that the site can accommodate up to 210 dwellings, and it is up to. It gives the developer a ceiling number. It doesn't necessarily mean they will come forward with 210. It just means they cannot come forward with more than 210 without coming back through a planning process. It doesn't prevent them from coming back with less than 210. That is true of most of the policies within the local plan. They do not set an upper limit because it is for the application process to demonstrate the impacts of what is being proposed, but it gives some developers, I suspect a lot of developers review it as a minima. That is the planning process, for better for worse. That is where we are in respect of that. With regards to access to the country park, again, I reiterate the point, members can impose that as a condition if they wish to do so. With regards to the early delivery of infrastructure, I suspect that's in reference to the highway improvements. The way the conditions are structured within all 4 applications you'll be considering this afternoon is that the highway improvements have to be in place before any of the dwellings can be occupied. It doesn't stop the developers building them. It doesn't actually prevent them from selling them. What it means is the people can't move in because the harm identified only arrives when people start living on that site. So that will be mitigating the harm of the development, but it will also be making improvements to the wider community, particularly in respect to the 90-degree bends from Bingham Road round to Colston Gate, which I think the resident who lives on that corner has built that front wall, or has currently not rebuilt that front wall on countless times in the decade I've worked at the authority. It is a source of many accidents, near misses, and I dare say potentially worse. So that is a wider benefit. I suspect that is the infrastructure that's being referred to. With regards to social housing, again, without wishing to put words in the developer's mouth, I very much doubt it is we are doing what the developer wants. It is what the affordable housing officer has requested. The policy requires 10% affordable housing in Cockgrave. Again, that is members' plan. That is adopted by the authority. I take your position on it, but that is what we have to work to. Finally, with regards to the pedal objection, again, I can only reiterate that the Highway Authority have looked at it. They have not voiced any objections or any concern in relation to the cycling provision or lack of in that particular part of the borough.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There are 4 applications here, as has already been said several times. So probably my comments will probably relate to all 4 applications because they're sort of similar, they're common ground. So I suspect we're probably going to spend more time on this first application and less time on the subsequent ones because we'll already have debated it. So I hope we probably need a little bit of latitude in the amount of debate. Firstly, condition 17, just to note or welcome the electric vehicle charging points, which is very good. I do want to just applaud Mr. Taylor before I forget. Thank you for having that little map in the corner of all the photos with your direction. That was really helpful, very useful, and it did provide all the necessary context. So that would be great if on large applications that could become the norm. That would be fantastic. So that is much appreciated. Having said that, I'm afraid I need to take some issue with Mr. Taylor because mention has been made about pedestrian crossing. And I think this is a case where there should be some provision made, whether it's section 106 or otherwise, in order to provide a pedestrian crossing on Bingham Road. And I want to point Mr. Taylor to, it is relevant, an application at the top of Shelford Road in Radcliffe-on-Trent for 400 houses, where part of the agreement for that approval was that a pedestrian crossing be provided in the centre of Radcliffe-on-Trent, which was probably getting on for a mile away from the development, to facilitate school children crossing the main road to get to the schools. So there is a clear precedent for conditions relating to pedestrian crossing or road improvements a long way outside developments. So I hope that can be taken on board and borne in mind when we come to the detailed application. I also would like to, and this is, most of these comments are general across all the applications, Madam Chairman, and it's in relation to wheel washing. And I do notice there are conditions relating to wheel washing, and they need to be stringently enforced because I'm sure all members have evidence, because I certainly, in various applications that I've experienced around the place, where there have not been wheel washing facilities sufficient to stop mud coming onto the road from the construction vehicles, and it has caused real problems and ongoing problems because they might sweep the roads, which is completely insufficient because a layer of dust remains on the road, and the next time it rains, it becomes a greasy skid pan. So it needs to be absolutely crystal clear that there are compulsory wheel washing facilities on all the sites to ensure that no mud is brought by construction vehicles back onto the public highway. Walking and cycling, it is disappointing that there is no comment from the county highways on that, and you may not be surprised to know I should be taking that up in another quarter, because I think we should have provision for walking and cycling within each of these sites, even if it's just on the main spine roads that go into the site for additional cycling, because whether it's a district authority or a county authority, we are trying to promote walking and cycling and active travel. So we should be providing the means to do that. It's important that we allow provision for the walking. The ward member made the comment about parking provision, and it's human nature in all these new developments that the roads to each of the houses off the main spine roads are always planned very narrow, and then, as he indicated, cars end up being parked half on, half off, and then it makes it very difficult for pedestrians because usually, or there are not always, pavements provided, and so it does make it difficult for that walking, and also for keeping an eye out for children who may be running in and out between those parked cars. So I think we need to be far more aware of that safety hazard and safety concerns in relation to walking and cycling. And then I would just also, I support the comments made by the ward member regarding parking outside the post office. It's very laudable that the mini roundabout is being proposed, but has sufficient thought being given to the layout of that mini roundabout to ensure that there can still be parking provision for the post office, because we need to be there are various things. We need to be supporting post offices because we all know they're closing far too often. Secondly, it shouldn't be to the detriment of users of the post office that planning permission is approved for developments away from the post office. So we need to ensure that these developments are not detrimental to the provision of businesses. In fact, when we're talking about the post office, it could be other businesses as well, couldn't it? So we need to ensure that they don't impact on other businesses. So I think most of it does tend to relate. Oh, I haven't mentioned one other vital thing, Madam Chairman. There are various references to surface water drainage and sewerage. In fact, I think I remember there are 2 conditions relating to surface water, but I'm particularly concerned, again, in relation to parking, but this is the driveways, to make sure they are all permeable and not hard surfaces where you get water runoff, so that they can still soak up the rainfall as it comes. And I know we always get the answer when it relates to sewerage that, oh, that's not a matter for a planning application. It's up to Severn Trent to provide sufficient sewerage to cater for whatever developments take place. That's all fine and dandy on paper and in theory, but we have examples around the borough where, particularly in heavy rainfall, the sewers are not able to cope, and so that causes immense hazards, whether it be health or flooding in various forms. So I think we need to be having far more assurances that there is sufficient sewerage that's capable of taking the development. So I'm not opposing the developments in principle, but as usual with a lot of these things, the devil is in the detail, and I think there is a lot of detail that must be addressed. I think it was Councillor Thomas who made the point that, you know, oh, well, that'll be dealt with in the detail stage. And we get to the detail stage, oh, well, that should have been raised at the outline stage. So we're in a bit of a ping pong game. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman, through you. With regards to the example of the crossing in relation to the Radcliffe-on-Trent development, forgive me, Councillor, I know of the development, but I haven't been directly involved in it, so I don't know the mechanism whereby the request for the crossing came from, whether that was something proposed by the applicant to mitigate a harm identified within their relevant transport assessments, or whether that was a request from colleagues at the Highway Authority. The position we are in on this current application is it has not been proposed by the applicant because their transport assessments have not identified that there is a need for such crossing. And similarly, the Highway Authority haven't taken issue with that position. So members can impose a condition if they wish to do so. The applicants have a right to challenge that through a separate process. That is the position.
Could I just ask then, Madam Chairman, if the committee was so minded to do so, is now the time to do it or at detail stage? So make sure that we, you know, don't shut the gate after the horse is bolted.
I would suggest that if members are concerned about it at this stage, it should go on as part of the consideration of this, but I would caveat that heavily. There is a process whereby the applicants can challenge or apply to vary or remove any conditions that they don't think are justified. And the Borough Council would have to consider that on its merits based on the technical advice from the various consultees. So but heavily caveated, but yes, members can do that if they wish to do so. With regard to walking provision, I revisited the sites over the last couple of days to take the site photographs to make sure they were up to date. I'm mindful several seasons have been and passed since the applications were first submitted. Several changes have occurred. 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, walking from the Bingham Road, Colston Gate, S Ben junctions down towards the canal, heavily trafficked, surprisingly heavily trafficked. It is a wide footway. It is not necessarily delineated as a footway cycleway, but there were several young mothers, young fathers walking with children in hand, pushchair. It is a wide footway that serves and is well utilised. So there is existing footway, and that will no doubt serve the colliery development that was completed a number of years ago. With regards to the concerns about the parking layout, again, I would reiterate it's a matter that is a matter for future consideration, because that is dependent on us knowing what the layout is. So that is a matter for consideration as part of reserved matters. With regards to the concerns about parking impact, parking reduction as a result of the roundabout proposed outside the post office, forgive me, the documents submitted are embedded within some fairly detailed, fairly technical travel assessments that have come in terms of the drawings that I've shown members today. They will have been closely scrutinised by your colleagues at the County Council. May I suggest that you voice concerns with them directly? There have been no comments or concerns come back from colleagues about the potential impact or the reduction in parking in this particular area.
Forgive me, Madam Chair, if I could just interrupt. I accept what you're saying. Just interested to know, was any specific comment submitted by anybody involved with the post office in the consultation period relating to the applications?
I understand the question. I can only refer members to the comments we have received in respect to the application are on the agenda papers that you have full access to on the website. Without revisiting them myself here and now, I'm not sure if it was flagged by any individual, but it certainly would have been a matter that will have been scrutinised as to what is the existing situation, what is the proposal, what is the wider impact. I would like to think, again, not being a qualified highway engineer, I have a certain amount of knowledge about certain matters, but I would never profess to be an expert in those matters. Just covering a few of the other items that Councillor Clark has raised, the concerns regarding surface water drainage. You're quite right, Severn Trent Water have been consulted as part of the application. As members will be aware, consultees have up until the point of determination to comment on an application. They've come back and they've voiced no objections with regards to the proposed drainage methodology that's been submitted as part of this, and indeed the wider applications. Similarly with regards to the sort of levels of foul sewerage, there are separate processes alongside but outside of the planning system that developers have to go through to secure the relevant paperwork to ensure that their development doesn't impact on the wider systems, if I can put it in those terms. And finally, condition 25, I think perhaps addresses the final point that you raised about concerns about the runoff of water from driveways onto the highway. It requires that no development should be brought into use and access to driveways are constructed to prevent any unregulated discharge of surface water from driveways onto the public highway.
Yeah, I was aware of that, Madam Chairman, but it just refers to preventing unregulated discharge of surface water from the driveways. In other words, if they provided some form of private gully or whatever into that's different to the surface of the driveways being permeable in the first place, so that it acts more of a sponge rather than a channel, if you like.
Thank you. I believe all driveways have to be a permeable surface now.
Not necessarily, Madam Chairman. If you want to undertake the works as permitted development, i.e. without the benefit of planning permission, there are requirements that they need to be a permeable surface. If it helps members, I think ultimately it comes down to the topography of the site and the impacts of the design layout, which we do not have those details before us now. We don't know which ways driveways are falling, how they're orientated relative to the land levels as are or as may be revised as part of subsequent applications. I appreciate the point. I think this is genuinely a matter for consideration at reserve matter stage, because we will then have the information as to how many driveways are orientated, which direction they're facing, what surfacing may be proposed for those driveways, whether that be tarmac, permeable tarmac, block paving. The options are almost endless.
In the nicest possible taste, Madam Chairman, we'll mark your card on that one then.
Noted.
Perhaps, I mean, if you're looking for it hasn't been moved, has it yet? But if I could move the recommendations, but I would like to include a condition that pedestrian crossing be include the provision of a pedestrian. Of course, this is the difficulty with this, where you've got 4 applications, which is basically one. And so that's why I keep saying we're almost discussing all 4 applications on this first one, aren't we? Because I would like provision for pedestrian crossing on Bingham Road to be included as part of the requirements of the highways.
If it helps, Madam Chairman, I would suggest that if that is something that members wish to consider, they should consider that as part of all 4 applications.
Yes. Yeah.
Just for consistency's purpose. Again, I would caveat it that all 3 applicants across all 2 allocations would have the option to appeal any such conditions.
Yeah, I fully accept that, Madam Chairman, but if we don't raise it now, and if it's not debated now, if we then complain in whenever it is, oh, well, you should have raised that at outline stage. And I fully appreciate the applicants still have the option to apply to have it cancelled, but we need to be expressing the concerns of the local population.
Madam Chairman, if I may, is there a possibility, I'm just looking at legal, is there the opportunity for this to potentially be a Grampian style condition within the section 106? I'm thinking on my feet here. Again, not being a lawyer.
There's no reason why it couldn't go into section 106 rather than the conditions? Or, again, thinking on my feet, I'm conscious that because travel plans haven't shown any need for it, highways haven't requested it. It's not something that we discussed with applicants at any stage, so it's sort of new to all of us. So if it was in the 106, it would be explored before the permission was issued. And certainly in the 106, we could pin down a location, because Bingham Road is probably quite long. I'm not familiar with it, but we would want to obviously be more precise in where it was going and highways involvement in that. So it could go into the 106. If for whatever reason, if we've done all of those explorations and there's reasons from any party why it couldn't go into the 106, I think we would then bring that back to committee, either to report to the committee to say that this can't be achieved for whatever reason, and is your decision the same, essentially, which I think may be a preferable position, well, from my point of view, but I'll be guided by the officers at this stage, than putting a condition on that doesn't meet the 6 tests and potentially opening ourselves up to an appeal or a separate route. But I'll be guided by how officers would prefer to deal with it.
I'm not bothered what the process is for doing it, whether it's within the section 106 or as a condition. I'm just conscious that it needs to be raised and needs to be there to show that concern has been expressed and that provision can be debated and discussed. As I say, otherwise we miss the opportunity to have it debated now, then it's lost, isn't it?
And I think that's fine. If members are giving officers a mandate to go away and discuss this proposal and explore that further with a view to it going into the section 106, we will certainly do that and report if we're unable to.
Yeah, I agree with the legal advice in respect of this. I'm mindful this is a new request to officers. It's a new request from members. It's a new request to the applicants who are in the room. We have not discussed this. We don't know where it might go, what it might look like, whether it's technically feasible. I say that being not a highway engineer, in terms of is there a suitable location. As the legal advice is, if we explore that through the section 106 and it is potentially not achievable or not acceptable to the parties involved who would have to sign into the 106, we could come back to members, make you aware of that. You could reconsider that point. Again, I'm thinking on my feet, arguably your position may be, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, you may want to impose a condition. We then may go through the process whereby the applicant has a right to consider that. If that's acceptable to Councillor Clark, then I suggest that's probably, because there's still a little bit of work to do on the section 106 agreements. Again, they are intrinsically linked, and therefore there are a greater degree of complexities in that than the consideration of the planning applications this afternoon.
I think, Madam Chairman, that we certainly needs to be in there. Across the 4 applications, the cost of pedestrian crossing is going to be pretty slight when spread. If we make sure it's at the same condition in all the applications, the cost spread across is going to be pretty slight, but it will mean a lot for road safety and pedestrian safety, because that's a jolly busy road now, never mind about when there are more houses there.
Can I suggest to mark it now? So we'll go down the 106 route and not condition it at this stage, but maybe it goes on as an informative to keep everyone focused that we must address it, if you're happy with that approach. So your motion would be to move as per the recommendation in the late reps, the conditions as per the report and as amended by the late reps, with an additional informative that a pedestrian crossing, provision for a pedestrian crossing should be within the section 106 agreement.
Yeah, so long as it doesn't get forgotten.
It won't do.
Thank you. And we need a seconder for the. No. Councillor Mason, second it. Right, and you requested to speak next, please.
Yes, I did, but it was actually on condition number 25 about the discharge of the surface water on the site, and that has already been, but also about the it's under a note to applicant about that they should consult Severn Trent Water, who should be satisfied about the sewerage and disposal systems. That isn't a condition then, that is just a note for them to do it. It isn't a condition that they should do that.
Through you, Chairman, just to clarify that the conditions within there are from the technical consultee, so they're from Severn Trent Water. As part of that, they've also asked for the informative note to go on there to remind the applicants, because it is a separate process alongside but outside of the planning process. They think of it as a series of permissions you need to obtain. You need to obtain your planning permission, you need to get your drainage permission and your various other, your building regulations, for example. So it's a reminder, shall we say, to the applicants. That's why it's on as an informative as well as a condition.
Okay, thank you. That was all.
Councillor Thomas, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm concerned about this application. I personally can't vote for it when there's no condition to require cycle access across into the country park, and I'm very uncomfortable with the education clause in section 106. I'm also taking on board Councillor Clark's point about the pedestrian access, but I'm also aware that this application, is on an approved site and needs to be got through quickly. But I do feel that we've had a huge amount of late representations on this. We're also being asked to give quite a lot of authority to the director of, for this area to actually sign off various things. And I have a feeling it would be better to take this application away and bring it back very quickly with a lot of these matters resolved. And I think that would be a better way forward. If Councillor Clark's motion needs to be voted on first, then I will vote against, but I would prefer to put forward a motion that we actually suspend this decision of this application until all the matters that have been raised can be sorted out. The conditions that have been challenged by the developer can be clarified, and so we come back with a clean set of proposals for us to vote on, and hopefully very quickly, and get it through quicker. And that would be my proposal. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, but we have had a proposer and a seconder. If there's no further speakers, I suggest we go to the vote. I apologise for the very late representations that we were given just before this meeting. And I'm going to ask the solicitor to expand on exactly what we should be saying, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the motion before members is the resolution as per this item 2 of this application within the late representations to amend that resolution from the original agenda wording. And it's to be authorised to grant planning permission subject to the prior signing of a section 106 agreement and the conditions of those set out in the agenda or those as amended by the late representations report, with authority for the director to make any changes, extremely minor changes. So we're talking about typos or single wording that don't alter the nature of those conditions. If they did alter the nature of those conditions, it would of course come back before members. So that is the resolution, the conditions as set out in the agenda and the late reps, and the additional informative as moved by Councillor Clark.
Thank you. So all those in favour of the motion? Oh, sorry. All those against? All against. So the motion carries. That motion is carried. Okay.
Madam Chair, would it be possible to have a brief break?
Right, thank you, councillors. I believe time is up. If we could continue. Could I point out that the next three applications will probably cover. Sorry. You won't. Is that working? Okay. Sorry. Right. Well, I'm always shouting at you, so. So, as I was saying, the next three applications are covering the same ground virtually, except slightly different sites. So I'm sure all the points that we've raised about the difficulties on the first application will be applying to these as we go through. I hope we can be more succinct on these in order to finish the meeting in the allotted time, please. So that's as gently as I could put that.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, just before we move on to the next three items on the agenda, again, at first glance, the applications may appear slightly more complex than they potentially are. Again, they are an allocated site for around 190 homes. Collectively, the three applications propose up to 235. Officers, consultees and the applicants have again spent considerable time reviewing the applications, and they've been considered both individually and collectively in terms of the impact that each application before you would have, but also the collective impact across the entire allocation. Members should note that they do form one strategic allocation, and therefore, whilst I would never be so bold as to tell members what they should do, they should have this as a consideration in the determination of all the applications that they do form. They are three parts of the same puzzle, for want of a better phrase. Firstly, we shall consider the application at the easternmost end of the allocation, which is for up to 100 of the dwellings. We'll then move on to the middle third of the allocation, which is for up to 90. And finally, we'll consider the westerlymost third, which is for up to 45 dwellings. Members are advised that, again, there are some late representations for this application. Just taking members briefly through those. It's alteration again, it's the same alterations proposed to the recommendation wording. That is common across all applications members will be asked to consider this afternoon, and that is the only late representation in respect of this particular application. If I could have the first slide, please. So as previously indicated, we'll be looking at the yellow area on the allocation, which encompasses the yellow area, the brown area and the green area on the plan before you at the moment. Again, the site is allocated within part 2 of the local plan for around 190 dwellings. This application proposes up to 100 of those dwellings, but the totality of the development on land south would be up to 235. Officers and technical consultees have again assessed the proposal, the impacts and the quantum of development to ensure that it can be suitably mitigated. Again, there are paragraphs within the agenda papers that address the increase in quantum of development from 190 to 235, and they're covered at paragraph 66 of this particular report. The site is bound by mature trees separating the site from Hollygate Lane to its north. To the east of the site is bound by the Grantham Canal, and to the south and west they are bound by open countryside. However, it should be noted that the two fields to the immediate west also form part of the allocation. Within the site, there is a residential property which is proposed to be retained and is accessed separately from Hollygate Lane. And within that site, there are a number of outbuildings to the rear of the dwelling, and a range of former stable buildings, which have more recently been converted to kennels for the use of training of greyhounds. There are also a series of metal runs within the grounds of the property that are used for were used for the exercising of greyhounds. The site is largely overgrown. Access is proposed in the form of a new T-junction onto Hollygate Lane, approximately halfway along the site's frontage. Let's have the next slide, please, Phil. So the red line shows the application area in question. You'll notice at the northern edge of the red line, there is sort of the indentation that comes around the residential property that is proposed to be retained. And the access would be approximately halfway between that property and where the Grantham Canal is. And there will be a more detailed plan of that access coming up shortly. The kennels / stables, the metal runs and the outbuildings to the rear of the property would be demolished. But as I say, the dwelling would be retained and retain a separate access point to what members are being asked to consider this afternoon. Again, I'll take members on a virtual site visit around the site. We'll be starting on the footpath to the western side. So on the right-hand side of that image is a mature green hedgerow. That is the western boundary of the site. Have the next slide, please, Phil. Moving along that footway, we get to Hollygate Lane, looking right in a generally easterly direction. You'll see the large green tree on the same side of the road as the photographer stood at the moment. That is the front corner of the site. So next photograph, we move towards that large mature tree, which dominates the right-hand side of this photograph, and you'll see the green hedgerow boundary, mature trees, greenery in general along the site's frontage on the right-hand side of that image. Again, moving slightly further forward, you will note the industrial park on the left-hand side. This is a different industrial park to the one we started at on our previous site visits. And again, stepping forward into the next image, we see the entrance to the residential property to be retained. The white access gates in that image are the access to the residential property, and the kennels and outbuildings are currently accessed by the driveway that goes around to the left-hand side of them. That driveway would not be utilised as part of the proposal before you, so it would just be access to the residential property that would be retained. And again, stepping forward in the image, we move further along Hollygate Lane with the site again on the right-hand side of this image behind the hedgerow until we hit the boundary of the site, which is formed by the Grantham Canal, and that is looking along the towpath in a generally, get my orientation correctly, southerly direction, I believe. Coming back to the access point, I've gone up the gravel drive to the side of the residential access, and we're now within the site. So the house is actually behind me in this photograph. Hollygate Lane to the left-hand side. So you'll see the hedgerow running along the middle of that image. If we can have the next image, please, we move slightly further forward and you start to see the kennel buildings on the right-hand side. Again, the next image takes us slightly further forwards to an approximate location where the access point would be coming into the proposal site. Next image, we start to spin around to the right and we see the kennel building starting to appear, and again in the next building. So the kennel buildings, the former stable yard would be demolished, the house in front of you would be retained, but the buildings to the left-hand side of the house, which we'll look at in the next image, I believe, no, that's the side of the stables to be demolished, as is the next image. So that would all be cleared as part of the proposal, and this shows the area of the property to be retained. So a new boundary fence has been erected along its rear boundary, and everything beyond that is proposed to be cleared, and that comprises a series of outbuildings which are visible on the right-hand side of this image. We are now generally looking in a southerly direction, and you'll begin to notice the overgrown nature of the wider site. And as we step forward, you start to get clearer views of this. I hope members will forgive me for not wading through that to take photographs. There wouldn't have been a lot to see other than me being neck deep in grassland and sneezing. Moving to the next image, we move along the back range of the outbuildings, and again the arrows and the plans show you where we are physically within the site, and then we start to see the metal runs that were used for the training of the greyhounds. This is an indicative plan, again showing that the site could accommodate up to 100 dwellings. The red arrow indicates the point of the access, and the white blocks area again indicates the house that would be retained as part of the proposal. Again, I would advise members that the site is allocated, it is within your local plan, and it's before you as an outline application with only the access to be considered. No technical consultees are objecting to the proposal, and again, the Highway Authority are not objecting to the access arrangements. That is subject to the suite of conditions requiring the off-site highway improvements. The application is before members this afternoon, again, because it requires the land owned by the Borough Council to put the roundabout we considered as part of the previous application on Hollygate Lane in. Whilst we're considering a third of the allocation, this application does form part of that wider allocation, and that roundabout is required to mitigate the highway impacts resulting from not only this application, but the wider allocation. And it is for that reason alone that the application is before members this afternoon. No objections have been received from ward councillors or the town council. And again, whilst representations have been received, they're set out in the agenda papers, and officers are content that the issues raised can be mitigated through conditions and section 106. Therefore, officers are recommending that members approve the application as per the revised wording in the late representation and as per the conditions in the agenda papers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We have two speakers, the same two for the first application. So Mr. Gallage, would you like to come forward, please? Thank you when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members, officers, fellow speakers. For the record, I'm Robert Galley, Planning Director, Barrett Davison Homes. Yet again, Madam Chairman, considerable dialogue and discussion has taken place over a considerable period of time with your officers and officers from various statutory consultees and stakeholders. And as we've heard, there are no outstanding objections from any of the named specified parties to the application stroke proposal before you currently in the form that it currently is. Yet again, a comprehensive view has been taken by all interested parties across Cockgrave and cumulatively in terms of impact and the remaining two applications south of Hollygate Lane, plus of course the previous agenda item north of Hollygate Lane, upon which you've now voted and considered formally. For the record, confirm collaboration and cooperation between ourselves on this application and the other two applicants, proponents and developers south of Hollygate Lane as well. And of course, similarly, north of Hollygate Lane have all happened together. Now, Madam Chairman, although there are three individual separate outline applications before you, my plea to members is not to express concerns because all applications are bound by, first, a common local plan policy base, second, a comprehensive master plan approach south of Hollygate Lane, and third, a cumulative assessment regarding facilities services in Cockgrave as a whole with specified mitigation. For unity purposes and for joint purposes, community engagement has previously occurred between all applicants, proponents and developers south of Hollygate Lane, thereby again ensuring a holistic approach to issues, concerns, and each of us respectively have amended our approach, assessment and reacted accordingly. It's true, Madam Chairman, there are in relation to this application remaining objections as referenced in the committee report, and yet again, all have been evaluated professionally and properly and addressed accordingly. Once more, the officer appraisal is acknowledged. Section 106 planning obligations have yet again been tested and framed for this site individually, and of course, its wider cumulative role. The planning balance and conclusion is welcomed. Once more, recommendation is endorsed and the planning conditions are agreed. The timings and trigger points specified once again are acceptable and appropriate operationally, and early delivery, quote, for infrastructure provision and planned mitigation, including access highway improvement, is guaranteed. In conclusion then, I commend the outline application for up to 100 dwellings on this particular site through this application to members and urge the committee to endorse the recommendation accordingly. And finally, the company, the applicant, the developer has a considerable experience of consortium working collaboratively alongside other major volume house builders and developers, either on the same site overall or in close proximity stroke vicinity. This is highly applicable and relevant here. The interlinkage between north and south of Hollygate Lane is evident for everyone to see. It's important that proposed infrastructure provision is provided and coordinated. Similarly, agreed and planned mitigation and its early delivery needs to be planned and coordinated. This will be happening, I give you an assurance, by way of an in parallel collaboration agreement between Barratt David Wilson, Taylor Wimpey and Manor Oak Homes, coordinated by Barratt David Wilson Homes in the first instance as lead developer. Madam Chairman, members' endorsement today of this particular outline planning application will ensure certainty and confidence in moving housing delivery forward on the easternmost part stroke third as defined of the overall housing allocation south of Hollygate Lane, Cockgrave accordingly. And I commend the application to members accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Butler, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's déjà vu, isn't it? Anyway, so there we are. Much of what I said about the previous application is also relevant to this, and indeed the other applications on this site that you'll be discussing shortly. We do need a good mix of house types to reflect the market need and the real life needs of current and future generations. And I am hopeful that this will be taken on board by the developers and the committee. I note and I am grateful that more thought has been given to the footpath arrangements, especially on the south side of Hollygate Lane. Hollygate Lane is already a very busy road, as we heard, and is a main link into Cockgrave. And the thought I'd had of more pedestrians versus traffic was worrying. But as I say, I'm pleased with the work and design that has been done to hopefully mitigate that. This leads me to general comments about the proposed changes to the existing junction of Colston Gate and Hollygate Lane, which again is all linked into this whole all these applications, and the proposed new link road between Colston Gate and Hollygate Lane, which I know isn't specific to this particular part of the site, but it is relevant because it's all linked, so I thought I'd mention it. The existing junction of Colston Gate and Hollygate Lane is awful. There is no other word for it. The traffic priority is wrong and dangerous. Currently, the priority is given to vehicles approaching Cockgrave coming down Colston Gate, where they not only then encounter a tight bend, which is seen on the photographs, but also the junction with Hollygate Lane, which is currently give way. I've lost count of the number of bumps and near misses that have been at this junction as vehicles coming into Cockgrave along Hollygate Lane fail to notice that they should be giving way. I know that a lot of thought and discussion has taken place between the applicants and Highways Authority to change the layout of the junction and the priority. And as I say, I am grateful for this and I do appreciate it. The plan is to, in effect, make the Colston Gate into a T junction and give priority to Hollygate Lane. This absolutely must be done. And I don't want to see any excuses further down the line or reasons that why it may not happen. But I am confident from what I've heard so far that it will happen and it does. I mentioned that Hollygate Lane is already busy and we do see a lot of speeding along there, and indeed it's often used as a location for the camera safety van, which catches many speeders here. So you will understand again concerns and thoughts about pedestrian safety in particular. This application and the others on today's agenda also plan a new link road between Colston Gate and Hollygate Lane, effectively cutting across the existing field site and through the new developments, and then joining the new mini roundabout on Hollygate Lane. And again, I know that a lot of thought and discussion has taken place between the relevant parties, which I'm grateful for. And I also listen with encouragement to the comments just made by the applicant with regard to their commitment to that. And as with my comments about Colston Gate and Hollygate Lane Junction, this road and the roundabout absolutely must be provided I and residents will simply not accept the unforeseen problems in the future, delays or disagreements that may arise. I'm not saying they will, but these things are complicated between the various applicants and parties involved in the discussions. So I'm pleased to see that the conditions are in place on the papers, and I'm hopeful and will request that they are firmly embedded in the report and the conditions are kept. Finally, just a couple of queries really. Could we clarify, again, is typing queries on the S106 forms. On page 117, the primary school section, it looks like you've done a bit of a copy and paste from the application that you decided a little while ago, because you're referring to 210 dwellings. And I know, so I'm sure that's all that's happened. It's just a thing on the computer. And also, while I'm here and to save time, because I don't propose to speak on the next two applications, all these comments apply to this application and the other two applications today, including a further 106 S106 query of copy and pasting on page 169 and 221 along the same lines as I've just described. The 200, it refers to 210 homes, and I know that's a mistake. Also, please check condition 14 because it refers to development not taking place, or it hasn't taken place before April 2022. I suspect you mean 23. And finally, I appreciate colleagues and indeed the applicant's patience and understanding for the points I've raised this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Through you. Firstly, apologies on section 106. I am human. I do look for shortcuts. I have gone number blind on these four applications and the differences and similarities between them. So apologies, acknowledge, they will be corrected. No. With regards to condition 14, that is not a typo. The report has been drafted for, or substantially drafted for, a lengthy period of time now. There's been a lot of going backwards and forwards on this. So the applicants will be required by virtue of that proposed condition to resurvey the site prior to any development commencing. And obviously, depending on the outcome of that survey, appropriate mitigation would be required. So just to clarify that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and of course the late representations to apply to this one as well. Councillor Thomas again.
Yes, some of the comments I made for the previous application still stand in terms of concerns about section 106 for primary and the cycle access. I'm particularly concerned about cycle access across the whole of this site. Pedestrian links, footpath links are shown, but not cycle links. And there's no cycle link out to the Grantham Canal at the top. You know, if we take this forward, I would want that conditioned. If possible. But I do have a question and perhaps a concern about this particular site. And that is, paragraph 5 says the site is allocated for residential development in the adopted local plan policy 2.2. I'm not sure that all of this site is included in the allocation at 2.2. It looks to me as though some of the fields are additional to the site allocated in 2.2. So some of them are in the countryside or indeed in the greenbelt. And I've seen no discussion of that in the officer report. Maybe that it's acceptable for drainage plans to be allocated in the greenbelt and the countryside, but I would expect that to have been covered in the officer report, and I'm quite concerned that it hasn't been. So I'd just like to comment on that first, please.
Through you, Chairman. Again, with regard to the concern regarding cycle links, Councillor Thomas is quite right. Members can propose any conditions they wish to be additional to the officer recommendation for consideration by your good selves in the determination of the application. Again, if you want them to be conditioned to go to specific locations, you can be that prescriptive. With regards to the comment about the development, you are correct. There's shown on the plan there was a red line and a blue line. area. The red line included the indicative layout for the proposed development for up to 100 dwellings. There is a blue line area, which is basically land also within the applicant's ownership, so they have control of that. Within that area, they are proposing drainage mitigation measures for their application in isolation, but also looking at that cohesively, collectively for the whole allocation as well. Such works are permitted within the green belt. They are, it'll sound odd when I say they are not inappropriate development, and that's not me using bad English. That's the way the definition is described within the NPPF. There are certain types of development that you are allowed to do within the green belt that are not judged to cause harm, and there are other things that do that we have to consider. Apologies, I will put my hands up again. I am human if that's not been sufficiently covered within the report, but it has been considered by officers and is deemed to be acceptable.
Madam Chair, I just think this is a huge material consideration that part of the land is not allocated in local plan and it is in the green belt. And I think that discussion needs to have been put before members. And in this case, I think it's sufficient to refuse this application or at least send it away to come back again. Thank you.
Chairman, if I can come back and that officers and members of the committee are tasked with determining the application within the red line area only. It shows that mitigation can be provided on the adjoining land. That has been judged to be acceptable by the technical consultees, but members have to consider what is in the red lined area only. Therefore, they would not be potentially permitting development, physical development, houses within the blue lined area.
The red line area includes an area that is not in the allocation, and I would like to see the plans put up of the first plan you showed of the allocation for 2.2 and the allocation for this site side by side for members to just to judge themselves. The line of that site, which includes the drainage pond, extends outside the allocation area on 2.2. It goes all the way up to canal, and the 2.2 doesn't. It goes to about the end of that pond.
Only and exclusively within which the proposed drainage feature is being proposed. So in other words, within the red line of the application form before you, only proposed residential development. My apologies on behalf of the company as the applicant, the red line extending boundary on an illustrative master plan.
Right, well, thank you for that clarification. I don't normally allow it, but it was a major point that we had to address. The next speaker is Councillor Walker, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate the points about access. There doesn't appear to be any cycle access to the Grand Canal, which is again disappointing. I'd also like to say, you know, the hedgerow photos, are those hedgerows, can you just clarify that they're going to be left intact? They're not going to be taken out, please?
The application at this point is purely for the access arrangements, so there would need to be a gap to facilitate the roadway to come in. But members are not being asked to consider anything else other than that at this time.
So that will come back to committee for us to kind of decide on that, on those hedgerows that are established there.
Yes.
To Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, as I said earlier, obviously the comments relate to all the applications. So just to repeat, I'd like assurance on the wheel washing aspect. Again, I know it's in the condition, but it needs to be absolutely certain that it is proper wheel washing and not just cursory wheel washing, because it needs to include the fact that no mud should be brought onto the public highway. I reiterate the comments about walking and cycling and the permeability of the driveways. Again, to include, and if I, well, I'll just make some of the queries. There are some queries pertinent to this particular application, because flooding is referred to parent 69 on page 91. So I'd like just an expansion from the officers as to it says that the layout is a reserve matter. So is it at the reserve matter stage where the different flood zones need to be addressed? And then page 114 in the advisories, the third paragraph refers to Severn Trent and the fact there's a public sewer located within the application site. It just refers to you may not build close to. Some people's interpretation of close to might be 1 inch or 1 mile. I've experienced on other applications before that it's within 5 meters either side of a sewer. So I just like to ask for clarification of that, please. Okay.
Thank you. Through you, Chairman. Councillor Clark is quite right that there is a wheel washing condition. I think there's a requirement for details to be provided or for it to be provided. The applicants are in the room. They have all heard the concerns, the very real and relevant concerns. The condition is there. That is our tool to take action if, for whatever reason, the developers will be foolish enough to ignore your advice and ignore the condition on the planning commission. I'm not saying for one moment that they would, but that is our tool to take action should that scenario arise. With regards to the flood zone, it is only a relatively small part of the site that is not within flood zone 1, and it would be at the point of the reserve matter stage to assess what is before us and consider whether that requires any additional flood mitigation work. I suspect that the applicants have considered this at a relatively early stage, and whilst it's an indicative layout, I can't imagine for 1 minute that a house builder of this calibre would choose to build housing within a flood zone where they have an opportunity not to do so. Finally, with regards to the Severn Trent sewer notes, again, as discussed previously on the previous application, there will be a formal process that the applicants will need to go through that will dictate what that guidance is. Again, it's a note that's been sent to us directly from the drainage authority. Again, I won't profess to be an expert in such realms, but again, there will be dialogue between the applicants and the utility provider to indicate what that sterilised area may be, where the pipe actually is, and how they can potentially configure their layout when they submit a reserve matters application.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just before I move the recommendation, can I just ask, has any discussion taken place regarding, because we talked about pedestrian crossings before, which I'll include in the recommendation motion again, but got the Grantham Canal at the top of that picture, and that is a busy road already. It will become busier. Further to the east, a mile or so, the Stoggerthorpe Road, there is already a pedestrian controlled crossing for walkers using the Grantham Canal. Has discussion taken place regarding any pedestrian control of any pedestrian crossing at this point.
Again, through you, Chairman, again, it is not proposed as part of the application before us. It is not deemed to be necessary as part of the transport assessments. It has not been requested by colleagues as Highways Authority or been challenged by them in respect to that. The plan in front of you is purely illustrative. It does show that an indicative link around the pond towards the canal itself could be provided. But again, I would caveat that this is illustrative and we would have to consider that at reserve matter stage. I appreciate you talking about off-site works, but I would refer to my previous comment that it's not been demonstrated that there is a need for any off-site crossing as a result of the application process we've been through.
Okay, well, Madam Chair, if I could just, I'll move the recommendation, but with the similar phraseology that was previously used for the pedestrian crossing, so that we've got consistency across the applications.
Thank you. Is there a second for that, please? Councillor Bailey. Do you wish to add anything, Councillor Bailey? Do you wish to add anything? Okay. I will move to the recommendation then for this application. And it's the same altered recommendation as before.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. If there's no further speakers, the motion before you is the recommendation as per the late reps report with that amended resolution, conditions as per the agenda and the late reps report with that additional informative regarding the pedestrian crossing to be considered as part of the Section 106 agreement.
To all those in favour, please show. Against? The motion is carried. Next application is the 21/01203 outline again for the land south of Hollygate, the next plot along. It's for up to 90 dwellings with all matters reserved except for means of access again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, officers, members are advised that there have been some late reps received that are set out in the papers before you. Perhaps unsurprisingly, again, there is the proposed alteration to the recommendation wording, giving perhaps a little bit more flexibility, but not a huge amount, should there be any typos. And it's been exposed that I am not immune to such errors of abilities at times. So there's also been comments from the planning agent in respect to the planning conditions, most of which would be largely covered by that particular change to the recommendation. So if things were in there, then they could be addressed. I've set out a summary of the comments on the proposed conditions that were received from the applicants, just to clarify a number of points. Largely very, very minor issues. I think it's fair to say. I'm sure the agent will utilise opportunity to speak to correct me if he believes that to be the case. But again, just one additional condition that's proposed, and it's the highway officer in this particular instance, I believe, just clarifying a point that was raised in terms of what is required with regards to condition 23 to access point, whether it had to be the full junction in place before anything could be built. Turns out not to be the case. It's just the junction has to be able to be used before any dwellings that are going to be served from that particular junction are occupied, which is not a unsound clarification, for which I was welcome. Again, looking at the plan before you, we're now looking at the middle third of the site. Again, it's the yellow gold coloured area. There's risk of repetitive Again, it is a allocated site within the local plan. It's for around 190 dwellings. This particular application is outlined and proposes 90 of those dwellings. The totality of development will be up to 235. Again, officers and technical consultees have addressed the uplift in level of development proposed, and the matters are set out in paragraph 67 of the report. As with previous applications, only the access is to be considered. The site is bound by mature field boundaries on all 4 boundaries, with Hollygate Lane, the Members Business Park, and the land north allocation to the north of the site. The strategic allocations to the immediate east and west, and residential development to the south on the opposite side of Colston Gate. Access is proposed in the form of 2 vehicular accesses in this particular instance. First being a roundabout that members have previously considered as part of land north, that would also serve as access from Hollygate Lane, and a separate access with a change to priority arrangements onto Colston Gate. This would in effect provide the policy required spine road through the middle of the allocation that would serve to divert traffic travelling westerly along Colston Gate through the yellow area down to Hollygate Lane, and then change the priority junctions arrangements with Hollygate Lane, Bingham Road and Colston Gate. There is a public right of way that runs predominantly along the eastern boundary of the site. Site visit photographs will take members along that. Again, that is proposed to be retained, and there is a condition within the report recommending that that footpath is upgraded within the application site. I'll now take members on a virtual site visit, again utilising the arrows and the maps in the corners of the photographs in question. So we start again on Hollygate Lane, looking towards the Members Business Park. Application site is on your left-hand side, and this shows the area of land where the proposed roundabout would be constructed. The verge, sorry, if we can just go back slightly, Phil. The verge on your right-hand side, that is part of the land that's owned by the Borough Council. So again, this is why the application is before members this afternoon. Application site on your left-hand side. Jumping up to Colston Gate in the next image, telegraph pole is an approximation for the corner of the site. As we travel along Colston Gate, you'll notice the site's on your left-hand side and the residential existing development on the right-hand side. And I think the next image is further along, looking back at where we've just travelled from. The next photograph is the public right-of-way coming out onto Colston Gate, and apologies to the dog walker who must have thought I was following him walking down the track as we did. Application site is predominantly in agricultural use at the moment. As I say, it's bound by mature hedgerows on all 4 sides. Currently there is a crop in growth that will be cultivated at the appropriate time. Travelling down the footpath, we then turn back and look up towards Colston Gate at the top edge of the image, with Hollygate Lane behind us. And in the final image, I think we pop back out onto Hollygate Lane, looking back towards the Members Business Park. Again, members, the site is allocated, it's within your local plan, it is before you in outline form only, with only the access points to be considered. No technical consultees are objecting to the proposal, and again, the Highway Authority do not object to the access arrangements. Application is before members because it requires land that we own to facilitate the access arrangements. No objections have been received from ward councillors or town council, and whilst a single representation has been received, as set out in the papers, officers are content that the issues raised can be mitigated. The recommendation is therefore that members approve as per the revised wording in the late reps and as per the conditions set out in the agenda paper, including the additional conditions set out in the late representations. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one speaker for this application. Mr. Bainbridge, would you like to come forward? You're okay with the instructions?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, members and officers. If I may first say, my name is David Bainbridge. I'm a Chartered Town Planner at Savills. I provide planning advice on this site to Taylor Wimpey, who is the applicant. I'd like to thank your officers for a very thorough and extensive period of discussions with us all as applicants. As Mr. Galley has already said, there's been an extensive period of negotiations and cooperation, and that will continue going forward. It isn't that usual to see house builders all sitting together, almost on the same row, speaking with one another. And that's because that's what we've been doing for many, many years. Since prior to examination into your local plan, part 2, we have been cooperating with one another, and we fully intend to do so going forward. So we're very grateful for the fulsome reporting by your officers through to your committee. And going forward, we'd like to continue that level of cooperation, of course. We welcome the positive recommendations subject to planning conditions and planning obligations, and of course, subject to the late representation sheet which has come forward. I would endorse the comments made by Mr. Galley on the previous 2 planning applications in respect to the level of cooperation which is taking place, and also the compliance with your planning policies. This site, of course, proposed by Taylor Wimpey, is a central part of the south of Hollygate Lane allocation. And so, of course, members, you'll be aware that that is policy 2.2. It is fully allocated within your local plan, part 2. This is a comprehensive scheme. The plan that you see on the screen, prepared by master planners called CSA, is a plan which has been prepared under instruction by all 3 applicants. That's a comprehensive scheme which deals with all the policy considerations as far as we're concerned. This is not piecemeal. This might be 3 planning applications, but it's within a comprehensive framework. The infrastructure requirements of your planning policy 2.2 are capable of being delivered by all 3 planning applications south of Hollygate Lane. That comprises the new road connection between Hollygate Lane and Colston Gate, a 1 junction provision on Hollygate Lane, off-site highway works, including improvements to the Hollygate Lane and Colston Gate Junction, which is being referred to, improvements to the Hollygate Lane and Stragglethorpe Road Junction, which is also being referred to, provision of green infrastructure, biodiversity net gain, and contributions to the A52 as part of the partnership arrangements with the County Council. These matters which I've just mentioned there are in effect the limbs B through to G of your policy 2.2 within your local plan part 2. This proposal will deliver the requirement within your policy for 10% affordable housing on site. And as has previously been said, that includes provision for first homes. There was previously mention made about the summary for planning obligations in respect to provision for primary school education. Primary school education, of course, being a planning obligation matter, not covered by the community infrastructure levy. If I may just mention in respect to the schedule, the appendix to this particular planning application and report, and I believe it is on page 170, there is mention there that there has not yet been a feasibility assessment of the primary school in Cockgrave at Candleby Lane. Some will be familiar with that school at Candleby Lane. Now, what has been summarised there is that until that feasibility study is undertaken, it is not possible for your partner County Council Education Authority to confirm one way or another as to whether the financial contributions can be used to expand that primary school. So I'd just like clarification for members that for all 4 planning applications,
30 seconds.
Thank you, it is still possible that a feasibility study could be brought forward to make use of financial contributions for the primary school at Cockgrave itself. So in summary, this is a full, considered, comprehensive proposal. We're grateful to your officers. We fully intend to work closely with your officers going forward, and we would ask members to please support your officers with a positive recommendation and resolution to grant subject to planning conditions and planning obligations. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
No comments, Chairman.
Thank you.
Deja vu, I've forgotten to record my previous comments, so I'll have to say them again. Consistent with the other applications, And again, just for the record, I'll mention it again, the wheel washing, the permeability of the driveways. With this particular application where they have the spine road through, then I think that's where the walking and the cycling in particular becomes more important. And I would like to see at the detailed stage proper provision for a cycle track down that particular spine road at the very least. I notice in the notes the applicants, again, same thing with the sewerage. It says close to, but I accept the comments or the response to the previous application. It's up to the applicant to ensure that it's compliant with the Severn Trent's requirements to make sure there's no encroachment. So with that, I'll move the recommendation and the amended late reps, again with the same comments relating to the pedestrian crossing.
Thank you very much. Seconder, Councillor Mason. Do you wish to add anything? Thank you. Councillor Thomas, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, with a sense of deja vu again, I take the point about the there being a possibility of the school at Candleby Lane being increased so that it does take all the children, in which case it's even more important that that clause is not included in the section 106, giving the opportunity to use the money to enhance schools outside Cockgrave. And so my objections on that remain. I think what I'm concerned about with these three sites is that the policy 2.2 says they must come forward as one comprehensive scheme. Now, to me, that would have meant that all the access was via the roundabout. Even the traffic access was via the roundabout, instead of which we've got two additional junctions onto busy roads in the area. So I'm disappointed about that, but what actually I can't accept is the fact that there's no cycle link access between the three parts of this site. There are footpath links marked in an indicative sort of way, and those, you know, I've seen those in the past not actually get taken through to the next stage, but there's no commitment at all to cycle links across between the three bits. And I think this is very important because the current footpath, the current bridleway actually provides the linkage out to both sides from here. So on that basis, I can't support this application as it is. Although I do take the point, you know, I do have considerable sympathy for this applicant who's got the middle bit and is, you know, is dealing with the road, but it just doesn't connect with the other bits. So I can't vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker.
Can we go back to that site map of the three sites? So are we going to have two of the attenuation ponds side by side? Is that the plan, or is this just a kind of artist's impression of what may happen? And are those roads, they're not going to link between those, the kind of the bottom left-hand site and the middle site? They're not, there's going to be just two cut-off roads there?
In simple terms, we don't know.
Right.
It's illustrative.
Yeah.
We're not being asked to consider the internal configuration, the layout of the site, to use the correct planning terminology. We're being asked to consider the access points and the principle of development. Similarly, with the drainage, it's probably a reasonable assumption that the drainage will be in that location, but what form it will take will have to be as part of the design for later consideration. They have demonstrated that a site with that level of development on it can be drained to the satisfaction of the technical authorities.
Well, I certainly hope the cooperation that's been talked about this afternoon continues and we see some sort of cooperative look, because that looks piecemeal.
Again, if it helps, we and the technical consultants, so we as officers, have considered them collectively and individually, because you're right, it's three applications. They are working close together. I can attest to that. It's been a lengthy discussion going on. What may not happen is simultaneous delivery. That will be dependent on other considerations within the various organisations. So again, I'm looking to the gallery again. I appreciate it's a break from protocol, but I assume that one developer may be in a position to start before the other two. I'm not quite sure how the collaboration agreement works, and if it, again, a break from protocol, I can see Mr. Galley gesticulating, who may be able to clarify for the benefit of members.
Thank you. I'm sure members found that a bit helpful. Your comments won't go out on the YouTube connection because you haven't got a microphone. Thank you. So, speakers.
I just for Councillor Thomas, in terms of the education contribution, to maybe provide some comfort there. The latest version of the draft, which has gone back to the applicants and they haven't commented on yet, but certainly that's gone with the Borough Council requesting that the education contribution is spent first within the Cockgrave primary planning area, but in the event that it's not possible to expend it, so as a result of that feasibility study saying that primary school can't be extended, to be spent at another school within 5 miles of the site. So only if it happens that that school can't be extended, we want the county to still be able to spend that money and provide places nearby. So we're trying for, we know that plan A is on that school, but securing that contribution can still be spent if that school can't accommodate any expansion.
Councillor Thomas again, please.
Yes, I did read that in the paperwork. However, I don't think it's acceptable to have that backstop in there. Places have to be provided in Cockgrave, and that's it. Otherwise, it's not sustainable development.
I think it's quite common for development of schools to be somewhat delayed. I know that the 1,050 houses in my area had to wait until there was considerable building before things happened. So I'm sure we'll make a note of your concerns, and we will now, as I believe, as no one else is indicating, move to the
Thank you, Madam Chair. So same as the past two, resolution is as per the amended version in the late reps report, conditions as per the agenda and amendments in the late reps, with the additional informative in relation to the pedestrian crossing to go into a section 106 agreement.
Thank you. All those in favour, please show. Against? Motion carried. Now move to the final application, which is outline planning application for up to 45 dwellings with all matters reserved other than access, means of access. We've seen the map.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, members are advised that late representations have been received for the application and are set out in the papers. Again, the proposed alteration to the recommendation itself, just to add a modicum of flexibility. Comments on the conditions from the agent. Again, it is good practice and common courtesy to discuss and seek to agree conditions with agents prior to determination. It is not strictly necessary on outline applications, but nevertheless we do seek to do so where we can. In this instance, the agent has raised a number of concerns that officers have addressed and sought to correct within the late representations. Again, the issue that cropped up on one of the previous applications to do with the landscape and environmental management plan, the reference to 30 years from planting rather than in perpetuity, which would perhaps be a little over onerous. Similarly, the agent queried the wording for condition 21, which is one of the highway drawings. I have clarified with colleagues at the Highway Authority. In this instance, I can put my hands up and say it was an error on my colleague at the Highway Authority getting number blind and quoting the wrong drawing reference. That has now been corrected. Apologies, that only came through early this morning, so it's not within your documents, but I do have the drawing reference that I would like members to insert and consider in substitution for the wording within condition 21. So it wouldn't be drawing 122 Red C, it would be the relevant drawing showing the access, which is in the transport assessment. And I do have the reference if members want it, but I don't have it at my fingertips right now. Finally, corrections to conditions 24, again, just clarifying that the dwellings can't be occupied until the driveways serving those properties have been provided in with a bound material, so that the applicant isn't bound by delays with other developers not delivering their roads. Again, a point of clarification, not something the authority would necessarily have enforced against, but there is a requirement for conditions to be clear, precise, and various other factors. Similarly, condition 25, again, clarification that the dwellings can't be occupied until the access driveways for the parking areas serving the particular properties are constructed to prevent discharge of water onto the highway. Moving to the application sites, no surprise, we are looking at the golden yellow area. We are at the westernmost extremity of the allocation. It is an allocation within the local plan. It is for around 190 dwellings. This application proposes up to 45 of those dwellings, but the site would comprise a totality of up to 235. Again, officers and technical consultees have looked at that increase in number of dwellings proposed and is covered in the report at paragraph 67. As with previous applications, only access is to be considered at this time. The site is bound by mature field boundaries on its north, east and southern boundaries, with Hollygate Lane to the north, strategic allocations to the immediate east, and residential development to the south and west on the opposite sides, and indeed the opposite side in the southern instance and on the same side on the western instance of Colston Gate. The site is currently in agricultural use and is proposed to be accessed by a new T-junction onto Colston Gate itself. I'll take members on the same virtual, well, not the same virtual site visit, on the relevant virtual site visit around this particular part of the site. So again, members will see the redlined area for the application area in question. Moving to the next slide, we start at, where are we? We are on Hollygate Lane. We are looking into the site. I am risking life and limb for your benefits. You will see on the left-hand side of that image is the eastern boundary of the site. I am currently peeping through the hedge on the northern boundary. The next slide moves us further along Hollygate Lane towards the junction. Again, application site on your right-hand side, northern boundary on the edge of the highway, eastern boundary visible to the side of the large tree within that field boundary. And again, stepping slightly further back, we see the cottages that we glimpsed earlier before on previous applications. Again, crossing the highway to the opposite side of, I think technically I'm probably on the junction of Bingham Road there, but I won't go into dwell onto that too much. You will see housing on the corner of Colston Gate to the right-hand side of that image. This housing backs onto this part of the allocation of this particular application site. And I think the next image takes us up Colston Gate. Again, noticing the dwellings on the left-hand side that back onto the application site. Next image should be close to the brow of the hill. Again, dwellings on the left-hand side, and we're moving around onto Colston Gate, heading out towards Colston Bassett. Application site is the section of hedgerow between the, not particularly clear on this, there's a darker bit of shrubbery as in the foreground of the hedgerow on the left-hand side. Just beyond that, there's a section of sort of long green hedging and then a couple of trees. The application site is just behind that area of hedgerow on the left-hand side. I think the next image is, again, me poking my head through the highway verge into the site, looking left towards the properties on Colston Gate. And again, you'll notice the cottages in this image on the, just over the brow of the hill that we're down on Hollygate Lane, where we were a couple of minutes ago, again, visible there. And panning around to the right, you will see the boundary with the Taylor Wimpey part of the site in the next image. Again, you'll see that the site is agricultural use, doesn't appear to have any crop currently in it. Understandable, given that the application has been in for a good number of months now, and the farmer is probably unsure. Members, the site again has an indicative layout. You'll see the junction coming out onto Colston Gate that's proposed. It is that access point and the principle of development that you are being asked to consider. It is allocated within the local plan, it is in outline form, and this is only the access we are asking for consideration on this afternoon. Again, none of the technical consultees are objecting to the proposal, and again, the Highway Authority do not object to the access arrangements, subject to the conditions set out within the report. No objections have been received from ward councillors or the town council, and whilst the representations have been received, again, officers are satisfied that the issues raised can be suitably mitigated, and therefore the recommendation is that members approve as per the revised wording in the late representation, as per the conditions in the agenda, including the revisions set out within the late representations. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one speaker for this application, Mr. Nick Grace, please.
Thank you. My name is Nick Grace. I'm a locally based chartered town planner with offices in Nottingham City Centre and a local resident of Edwalton. I'm speaking in support of this application on behalf of the applicant, Manor Oak Homes, and the landowners. I have little to add to the comments that have already been made today, but to further endorse and stress that today's determination of this application and those others that are linked follows a lengthy road of positive consultation with a wide range of consultees as set out within the report. The only real matter that's not specifically been expanded on in the report, but I feel should be noted, is that significant pre-application consultation was undertaken directly with the local community. And a very well advertised and attended public consultation event took place in June 2019. A continuous period of dialogue has taken place between all three applicants, and some circa 5 years, and some of the baseline evidence work, such as the initial appraisal work relating to EIA matters, has been jointly commissioned and consequent reports commonly submitted in relation to the allocation south of Hollygate Lane, such as the overall illustrative master plan. This collaborative approach has resulted in Manor Oak Homes, who themselves are not a house builder, to submit an outline application to you for formal consideration, which is limited to the principle of developing up to 45 dwellings on part of the allocation, which is arguably the most sustainable area of the allocation due to its proximity and ease of walking into the very centre of Cockgrave. And we do support EV charging for cars on site, along with the delivery of affordable housing. This application also proposes a single point of access of Colston Gate, which is supported by the Highway Authority, and the illustrative master plan does show the potential for interconnectivity for pedestrians and cycles onto the adjacent land to the east. I hope the application can be approved today, and after many years of involvement promoting this site and submitting the detail needed to allow the grant of outline permission consistent with your local plan allocation 2.2. Many thanks.
Councillor Clark.
Rewind tape once again. Again, for the sake of the record, wheel washing facilities, permeability of driveways, and walking and cycling. And before I move the recommendation, I'd just like to ask on a couple of points. Firstly, was the highway consultation with highways, were they satisfied with the visibility splay to the west from the access junction with Colston Gate there? Were they happy with that visibility display? Because I appreciate it's no longer going to be the main road in inverted commas. Colston Gate coming up the hill, traffic coming around there, are they going to come on that junction too soon, or is there sufficient visibility display according to the highways? And I think you're probably going to tell me that it will be at reserve matters detailed stage, but I notice as you first turn into that estate, the very first access to that tandem development seems extremely close to that junction, but perhaps you're going to tell me that's the reserve matters issue.
Through you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Clark, Highway Authority are happy with the visibility displays as proposed for the junction. I think the next slide does actually show a slightly more detailed junction layout that the Highway Authority will have considered as part of the suite of technical documents before them for their consideration on that specific matter. They are satisfied with that on the basis that the other improvements are in situ and operational prior to any occupation of the dwelling. So making this route, choose my words, perhaps more tortuous or less desirable, shall we say. Also, those features of the T-junction at the junction of Colston Gate and further along by the Taylor Wimpey will slow the speed of traffic to an acceptable standard of the Highway Authority. And your crystal ball gazing is correct, Councillor Clark. The layout is indicative. It would be a matter for consideration at reserve matters. It's purely an exercise to demonstrate that the site could accommodate 45 dwellings without being cheek by jowl, shall we say.
And so by the same token, if you could just pop back to that, the original layout drawing, presumably there it looks to me very clear that that's intended as an access through to the adjoining development. So presumably again, that will be at reserve matters stage, and it's important that we obviously do consider those in some form of tandem so that we don't end up with, I can just imagine two access roads meeting at different points, a bit like building a tunnel from two sides of the channel and not meeting in the middle.
You've stolen the analogy I was going to use, Councillor Clark. Clearly, layout is not a matter for consideration this afternoon. We've heard from all of the developers. They have been working in collaboration with one another for a significant number of years on this. One would like to think that we wouldn't hit the nightmare England-France scenario whereby we didn't quite line up if access is proposed at that particular location.
Now, with that, Madam Chairman, I'll move the recommendations as amended by the late reps, and again to include the same phraseology regarding pedestrian crossing.
Yeah. Seconder. Councillor Bailey again, Mr. Thank you. Yes, councillor Thomas.
I'd just like to say again, really, that the supposed comprehensive scheme, you know, has its own drainage pond, has no play area. Okay, there's a potential for links, pedestrian and cycle links on that link, what's shown as a link, but there's no guarantee that they will happen. And the you know, what's happened elsewhere is that these have been shown and they've not happened. That should be you know, made to be happen. And we've got a situation where this developer is paying for a roundabout that they're not using to access the site, instead of which there's another entrance into the site round a blind bend. So I can't vote for this application, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further speakers? We'll move to the recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As before, recommendation as per the late reps, conditions in the committee report and the late reps, with the additional informative regarding the pedestrian crossing to go into the section 106.
Thank you. All those in favour, please show. That's fine. Against? Sorry.
Councillor, that's right. 4. That's double hand.
Motion carried. Thank you, councillors. That was the last application this afternoon. But before we go, I'm sure all members, officers, I know the chairman, myself, and everyone is devastated to hear of the deterioration in the health of Mr. Peckram. And we send our best wishes to his family at this very difficult time. Thank you.